The gavel came down like a death sentence. $3. That's all Clara Whitmore was worth. Less than a saddle, less than a bottle of whiskey, less than the dirt beneath the auctioneer's boots. Her step-uncle's gambling debts had led to this: a wooden platform in the scorching Texas heat, rough hands reaching for her like she was property to be claimed. The crowd's laughter burned hotter than the sun, but then a shadow moved through the dust. A cowboy's voice cut through the chaos. "Not while I still breathe." Everything changed in that moment. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far Clara's journey travels. The Texas sun had no mercy on July afternoons, and on this particular day in 1882, it seemed determined to burn witness into every cruel moment unfolding in the town square of Bitter Creek. Clara Whitmore stood on a makeshift auction block, nothing more than 3 wooden crates stacked and nailed together, her calico dress stained with the dust of a 2-day journey in the back of a wagon. Her wrists bore the red marks of ropes that had only been removed minutes before, and her auburn hair, once carefully pinned, now hung in disheveled waves around a face that had learned to hide its fear behind a mask of hollow resignation. She was 23 years old, and she was being sold. "Come on now, gentlemen. Fresh from Missouri, healthy as a mare, can cook, can clean, can bear children." The auctioneer's voice boomed across the square, his tobacco-stained teeth flashing in what he probably thought was an encouraging smile. "Who'll start the bidding? She's a mail-order bride, already paid for passage. Just needs a husband willing to take on the contract." Clara's step-uncle, Vernon Whitmore, stood at the edge of the platform, his weathered face slick with nervous sweat. His hands shook, not from guilt, but from the desperate need for whiskey that had driven him to this moment. 3 weeks ago, he'd lost big at a poker game in Abilene. The men he owed weren't the forgiving type. They'd given him a choice: pay up or pay in other ways. Clara had been the other way. "She ain't much to look at, Pete," someone shouted from the crowd. "Probably barren." "Got a sour face on her," another voice added, followed by cruel laughter. Clara forced herself to breathe slowly through her nose, a technique she'd learned as a child when her mother was still alive. Don't let them see you break. Don't give them that satisfaction. But her hands betrayed her, trembling at her sides despite her best efforts to still them. The crowd that had gathered was exactly what one would expect in a town like Bitter Creek. Drifters, ranch hands with dust permanently ground into their skin, shopkeepers who'd closed their stores to witness the spectacle, and a handful of women whose expressions ranged from pity to contempt. In the 1880s, mail-order brides were common enough. Women seeking opportunity in the West, men seeking companionship in a harsh land. But an auction like this? This was something else entirely. This was desperation dressed up as commerce, cruelty disguised as transaction. "I'll give you $2 for her," a voice called out. The speaker was a man named Jed Hutchins, a farmer known for working his horses until they dropped, and his wives, he'd had 3, until they ran away or died trying. $2 and a bottle of rye for your trouble, Vernon." Vernon Whitmore's face lit up at the mention of whiskey. "Now that's more like it. Do I hear $2.50? Silence fell over the crowd. Clara felt her stomach drop. $2. Her entire existence, her future, her body and soul, worth $2 and a bottle of alcohol to wash away the guilt of the transaction. Nobody. The auctioneer looked around, desperation creeping into his voice. This whole thing had been Vernon's idea, a way to settle debts and move on. But if nobody bought her, the men Vernon owed would come calling, and they wouldn't be satisfied with excuses. "Come on, fellas, she's young, she's strong." "She's got eyes like a spooked horse," someone interrupted. "Probably crazy." Clara's jaw tightened. She wanted to scream that she wasn't crazy, that anyone would look spooked when being sold like livestock, that her eyes reflected not madness, but the absolute destruction of every shred of dignity she'd ever possessed. But screaming wouldn't help. Nothing would help. She'd learned that lesson over the past 6 months living under Vernon's roof, after her father, Vernon's half-brother, had died of cholera. Vernon had been her only living relative, and the law gave him rights over her until she married. He'd taken full advantage of that legal reality. All right. Vernon's voice cracked with panic. He stumbled forward, nearly falling off the platform. $3. Just $3, and I'll throw in her mother's wedding ring. Real silver, I swear it. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The ring. Her mother's ring. The only thing she had left of the woman who'd sung her lullabies and taught her to read and promised her that life would be beautiful. Vernon had stolen it from her trunk 2 days ago. Now he was using it to sweeten a deal that was already rotten to its core. $3 it is. A man pushed his way through the crowd, and Clara's heart sank even further, something she hadn't thought possible. His name was Silas Drummond, not to be confused with the other Silas who would soon enter this story, and he was known throughout 3 counties as a man who collected things: pocket watches, guns, Indian artifacts, and on occasion, women. He had a wife already, a hollow-eyed woman named Mary who never spoke and never smiled. Rumor was he kept her locked in a root cellar when he went to town. "You got yourself a deal, Vernon." Silas Drummond grinned, revealing gaps where teeth should have been. He pulled 3 coins from his pocket and held them up to catch the light. $3 silver for the girl. She better be worth it. The crowd erupted in laughter and scattered applause. Clara felt the world tilting beneath her feet. This was happening. This was really happening. In moments, she would belong to a man who collected human beings like other men collected stamps. Vernon snatched the coins so quickly he nearly dropped them, his fingers closing around the silver with the desperation of a drowning man clutching a rope. "She's all yours! Clara, get down from there and go with your new husband." Husband. The word was a mockery. There would be no wedding, no vows, no gentle courtship, just ownership, just another object in Silas Drummond's collection. Drummond climbed onto the platform, his boots thudding heavily against the wood. He was a big man, gone soft in the middle but still strong in the shoulders, with hands that looked like they could break bone without much effort. When he reached for Clara's arm, his fingers dug in hard enough to bruise. "Come on then," he said, his breath reeking of onions and tobacco. "Let's get you home and see if you're worth $3. Clara's legs moved mechanically, carrying her forward because she'd learned that resistance only made things worse. She descended the platform steps, each one feeling like a step down into hell itself. The crowd parted for them, some faces showing amusement, others carefully blank. None showed intervention. That's when she saw him. At first he was just another figure in the crowd, another sun-weathered cowboy in a dusty hat, but something about the way he stood caught her attention, perfectly still in a sea of movement, his posture radiating a kind of controlled tension that reminded Clara of a wolf she'd once seen, coiled and ready to spring. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark shirt and leather vest despite the heat. His face was shadowed by his hat brim, but she could see his jaw, strong and clean-shaven, and the set of his mouth, which was pressed into a thin line of something that looked like anger. But it wasn't anger directed at her. It was anger directed at what was happening to her. Their eyes met for just a moment. His were dark, almost black in the harsh sunlight, and Clara felt something shift in her chest. Recognition? Maybe, though they'd never met. Or perhaps it was simply that his eyes, unlike everyone else's, didn't look at her like she was property. They looked at her like she was a person witnessing an injustice. Then Drummond jerked her forward, breaking the connection. "Quit your gawking," he snarled. "You're mine now. Best remember that." They were halfway across the square, heading toward a wagon that Clara assumed would carry her to whatever fresh hell awaited, when Drummond suddenly yanked her so hard she stumbled. Her knee hit the packed dirt, sending a sharp pain shooting up her leg. She cried out, unable to stop herself, and tried to regain her footing. "Get up!" Drummond's voice was sharp. "I didn't pay $3 for a clumsy mule." "I'm trying," Clara gasped, but her skirt had tangled around her legs, and her vision was blurring with tears she'd been holding back for hours. Drummond raised his hand, clearly preparing to strike her for her slowness, his face twisted with irritation. The crowd watched with the casual interest people show to street entertainment. No one moved to help. No one ever did. Then suddenly, there was movement, fast, decisive. A shadow fell across Clara's crouched form, and she looked up to see the tall cowboy standing between her and Drummond. He'd moved through the crowd like water, silent and smooth, and now he stood with his back to her, facing down the man who'd just purchased her. "She's not yours." His voice was low, controlled, but carrying an undercurrent of something dangerous. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a knife through silk. Everyone heard it. Everyone felt it. Drummond's hand was still raised, frozen in mid-strike. His face registered confusion, then recognition, then outrage. "The hell you talking about, Granger? I paid for her fair and square, $3. Ask anyone." Granger. So that was it. So that was his name. Clara had heard it whispered in Vernon's house sometimes. Silas Granger, a ranch hand who worked the big spread outside town. A man who kept to himself, who had a reputation for being deadly with a gun, but who never went looking for trouble. A man who, according to the stories, had once ridden with Texas Rangers before settling into a quieter life. Silas Granger didn't move except to lower his hand closer to the gun at his hip. Not touching it, just reminding everyone it was there. "I heard the transaction," he said quietly. "Heard it loud and clear, but that don't make it right, and it sure as hell don't make it legal. You can't buy a person in Texas, Drummond. That ended with the war." "This ain't the same," Drummond sputtered, his face reddening. "She's a mail-order bride. It's a contract. Vernon, there's her legal guardian, and he had every right." "He had the right to arrange a marriage, maybe," Silas interrupted, his voice still deadly calm. "But this wasn't a marriage arrangement. This was a sale. You bought her like you'd buy a horse, and we all heard you say so." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Now, I'm going to give you a choice, Drummond. You can take your $3 back and walk away, or we can have a longer conversation about whether what just happened here was legal, and I promise you, that's a conversation you don't want to have." The crowd had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to have stilled, as if nature itself was holding its breath to see what would happen next. Clara remained on the ground, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She'd seen confrontations before, had seen men posture and threaten, and sometimes follow through on those threats. But there was something different about this. Silas Granger wasn't posturing. Every word he spoke carried the weight of absolute certainty, and his stillness was more threatening than another man's rage. Drummond's hand slowly lowered. His eyes darted around the crowd, looking for support, but found none. Even his friends had stepped back, unwilling to get involved in whatever this was becoming. Vernon Whitmore had disappeared entirely, probably to the nearest saloon to spend his blood money. "This ain't right," Drummond muttered, but his voice had lost its edge. "A deal's a deal." "Then take your money back," Silas said, and for the first time he moved. He reached into his own pocket and pulled out $3 silver, his own money, and held them out. "Here, you get your money, I get a clear conscience, and the lady gets a chance to decide her own future. Everybody wins." "Except I wanted the girl." Drummond's voice rose, desperation creeping in now. "I need a wife. Mary's no good to me anymore, and I paid for this one." The casual way he spoke about his existing wife, "Mary's no good to me anymore," made Clara's blood run cold. What did that mean? What had he done to the hollow-eyed woman people whispered about? Silas's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. "Then you need to find a wife who chooses you," he said coldly. "Not one who gets sold to you for less than the cost of a good saddle. Now take the money, Drummond, before I lose my patience." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Clara could see the calculation in Drummond's eyes, weighing his pride against his safety, measuring his desire for a new possession against the very real threat radiating from the man standing between them. Finally, with a curse, Drummond snatched the $3 silver from Silas's hand. "This ain't over, Granger," he spat. "You made an enemy today." "I'll survive," Silas replied flatly. Drummond stormed off, shoving through the crowd with such force that several people stumbled. The onlookers began to disperse, the show apparently over, murmuring among themselves about what they'd just witnessed. Within minutes, the square was nearly empty, people returning to their daily routines as if a woman's entire life hadn't just been bartered and fought over in the span of 30 minutes. Only then did Silas turn around. He looked down at Clara, still on the ground with her dress dusty and her hair falling around her face, and something in his expression softened. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that was longer than fashionable, curling slightly at the ends, and extended his hand to her. "Ma'am," he said quietly. "You all right?" Clara stared at his hand, calloused, strong, steady, for a long moment. Part of her was afraid to take it, afraid that this was just another transaction, that she'd be trading one owner for another. But a larger part of her, the part that was exhausted beyond measure and desperate for any kindness, reached up and placed her hand in his. His grip was firm but gentle as he helped her to her feet. He didn't pull her too hard or hold on too long, and as soon as she was standing, he released her and took a step back, giving her space. "Thank you," Clara managed to whisper, her voice rough from thirst and unshed tears. I don't understand why you helped me." Silas settled his hat back on his head, his dark eyes meeting hers directly. "Because what was happening to you wasn't right," he said simply. "And because I've seen too many people stand by and watch wrong things happen without lifting a finger to stop them. Gets tiring after a while." Clara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how exposed she was, standing in the middle of the square in her dusty dress with no belongings, no money, no plan. "I have nowhere to go," she said, the words coming out small and defeated. "Vernon, my step-uncle, he won't take me back. He needed that money, and I don't have anyone else, no family, no—" "Hey." Silas's voice was soft but commanding enough to make her stop spiraling. "One thing at a time. First thing is getting you out of this square and somewhere safe. You eaten today?" Clara shook her head. She couldn't remember her last meal. Yesterday morning, maybe? Vernon had stopped feeding her regularly once he'd decided to sell her, probably to save money. Silas's jaw tightened again, that controlled anger flickering across his face. "Right. Come on then. There's a boarding house run by a woman named Mrs. Chen. She's tough but fair and she don't ask too many questions. We'll get you a room, get you some food, and then we can figure out what comes next." "I can't pay for a room," Clara said, shame burning in her cheeks. "I don't have anything." "Vernon took everything, even my mother's ring." "I'm paying," Silas interrupted. "And before you argue, it ain't charity and it ain't me trying to buy you either. It's just basic human decency, which seems to be in short supply around here today." Clara felt tears finally spill over, hot trails down her dusty cheeks. She tried to wipe them away quickly, embarrassed by the display of emotion, but they kept coming. Relief, fear, exhaustion, and a desperate gratitude all mixed together until she couldn't tell one feeling from another. Silas, to his credit, didn't comment on her tears. He simply pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, surprisingly clean despite the dusty environment, and offered it to her. "It's all right," he said quietly. "You cry if you need to. God knows you've earned it." They began walking toward the edge of town, Silas keeping his pace slow to match hers. Clara clutched his handkerchief like a lifeline, occasionally pressing it to her face as fresh waves of emotion threatened to overwhelm her. People they passed stared, whispering behind their hands, but Silas ignored them completely, his focus on navigating them through the streets. "Why were you at the auction?" Clara asked after a few minutes of silence. "You said you weren't looking for a bride." "Wasn't looking for anything except supplies," Silas replied. "I work a ranch about 15 miles north of here. Came to town for nails, coffee, tobacco, heard the commotion in the square, and—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Couldn't believe what I was seeing. Thought maybe I'd misunderstood at first, but no. Your uncle was really selling you." "Step-uncle," Clara corrected automatically. "My real uncle. My father's real brother died when I was young. Vernon was my father's half-brother from his father's second marriage. We barely knew him until my father died 6 months ago. And then he became your guardian." "Yes." Clara's voice was bitter. "The law says an unmarried woman needs a male guardian. I went from my father's care to Vernon's, and Vernon—" She stopped, unable to continue. "Vernon's a drunk and a gambler who saw you as a way to settle his debts," Silas finished flatly. "Yeah, I know his type. Hell, I've been his type. Before I straightened out, anyway." Clara glanced at him, curious despite everything. "You were a gambler?" "Worse," Silas said with a humorless smile. "I was a drunk gambler with a chip on his shoulder and a fast draw. Spent 5 years after the war just drifting, fighting, drinking, making every wrong choice a man could make. Ended up in jail more times than I can count. Finally met a man, ranch owner named Thomas Bridger, who took a chance on me when nobody else would. Gave me a job, gave me a purpose, gave me a reason to be better than I was. Been working his ranch ever since, 7 years now." "Is that where you're taking me? To this ranch?" "No, ma'am," Silas said quickly. "Like I said, I'm taking you to Mrs. Chen's boarding house in town. You'll have your own room, your own space. I ain't taking you anywhere that might make you feel trapped or beholden." They turned a corner, and Clara saw a two-story building with a hand-painted sign, Chen's boarding house, clean rooms, fair prices. It was modest but well-maintained, with flower boxes in the windows and a swept front porch. Silas opened the door and gestured for Clara to enter first. The interior was cool and dim after the harsh sunlight, and Clara's eyes took a moment to adjust. When they did, she saw a small lobby with worn but clean furniture, and behind a desk, a Chinese woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and iron-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Mrs. Chen," Silas said, removing his hat, "I need to rent a room for this lady. Best room you've got, for as long as she needs it." Mrs. Chen's gaze swept over Clara, taking in the dusty dress, the tear-stained face, the exhausted posture. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes softened slightly. "How long?" she asked Silas, her English accented but clear. "A week to start," Silas replied. "Paid in full, plus meals. And Mrs. Chen, she might need some things, clothes, toiletries, whatever a lady needs. Put it on my account." "You running a charity now, Mr. Granger?" Mrs. Chen asked, but there was no judgment in her voice, only curiosity. "Just trying to be decent," Silas replied. Mrs. Chen nodded slowly, then reached under her desk and produced a key. "Room 6. Second floor, faces the back garden. Quiet, private. I bring dinner at 6 o'clock. You need anything before then, you ring the bell." She pointed to a small bell on the desk. "Thank you," Clara managed, accepting the key with shaking hands. Mrs. Chen's sharp eyes fixed on her. "You safe now?" she said firmly. "Nobody bother you here. I make sure of that." Fresh tears threatened, but Clara blinked them back. "Thank you," she repeated. Silas paid Mrs. Chen, counting out bills that probably represented a significant portion of his earnings, then turned back to Clara. "I'm going to go get those supplies I came to town for," he said. "Should take about an hour. While I'm doing that, you get yourself settled, maybe take a bath if you want. Mrs. Chen can show you where the bathing room is. When I come back, we'll talk about what happens next. That sound all right?" Clara nodded, unable to trust her voice. Everything that had happened in the past hour felt surreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. This man, this stranger, had stepped in when no one else would, had defended her, spent his money on her, and was now giving her space and choices. It was more than she'd dared hope for in months. "Miss Whitmore," Silas said, his voice gentle, "I know you got no reason to trust me or anyone else right now, but I promise you, on my mother's grave, I promise, you're safe. Nobody's going to hurt you, nobody's going to own you, and nobody's going to make you do anything you don't want to do. Understand?" Clara met his eyes and saw nothing but honest sincerity there. She nodded. "I understand. And Mr. Granger, thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "Don't need repayment," Silas interrupted. "Just need to know you're all right. That's payment enough." He settled his hat back on his head and nodded to both women. "Ladies, I'll be back in an hour." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Clara standing in the cool dimness of the boarding house lobby with a key clutched in her hand and a fragile hope beginning to kindle in her chest. Mrs. Chen came around the desk, her movements brisk and efficient. "Come," she said, "I show you room, then draw bath. You look like you need both." As Clara followed the older woman up the narrow stairs, she finally allowed herself to breathe fully for the first time since this nightmare had begun. She wasn't safe yet. Not really, not permanently. But for the first time in 6 months, she wasn't in immediate danger. For the first time since her father had died, someone had treated her like a human being worth protecting. Room 6 was small but spotlessly clean, with a narrow bed covered in a faded quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a small wardrobe, and a single window that looked out over a garden filled with struggling vegetables and determined wildflowers. It wasn't much, but it was hers. For now, it was hers. Mrs. Chen pointed down the hall. "Bathroom there. I heat water, bring up in 20 minutes. You wait here, rest." After Mrs. Chen left, Clara sat on the edge of the bed, still clutching Silas Granger's handkerchief. She thought about everything that had happened, everything that could have happened, and everything that might still happen. She thought about Silas's words, "Not while I still breathe." He'd meant it. In that moment when Drummond had raised his hand to strike her, Silas Granger had stepped between her and violence without hesitation, willing to fight, willing to die if necessary, to protect a woman he didn't even know. Clara lay back on the bed, suddenly overcome with exhaustion. The ceiling above her had water stains that almost looked like clouds if she squinted. She traced their shapes with her eyes and let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to have a future worth planning for. Outside the window, the Texas sun continued its descent toward the horizon, and in the town square life went on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But for Clara Whitmore, everything had changed. She'd been sold for $3 and saved by a cowboy who understood that some things were worth fighting for, even when nobody asked you to fight. Especially then. The hot water Mrs. Chen brought up in careful trips, bucket after steaming bucket poured into the copper tub, was the first luxury Clara had experienced in longer than she could remember. She sank into it slowly, hissing as the heat touched skin that had grown accustomed to cold wash basin baths and quick, furtive cleaning when Vernon wasn't watching. The water turned gray almost immediately, 6 months of accumulated grime and despair lifting away in cloudy swirls. She scrubbed herself with the rough soap Mrs. Chen had provided until her skin turned pink, washing away not just the dirt, but the feeling of Drummond's fingers on her arm, the auctioneer's appraising gaze, the crowd's cruel laughter. When she finally emerged, pruned and exhausted, she found a simple cotton dress laid out on her bed, plain gray with small white buttons, nothing fancy, but clean and whole, and hers to wear. A note in careful handwriting read, "From Mrs. Chen, no charge." Clara dressed slowly, her fingers clumsy with the buttons. She'd grown so thin that the dress hung loose on her frame, but it was better than the filthy calico she'd been wearing. She folded that ruined dress carefully anyway, unable to throw away one of the last possessions she had from her old life, even if that life had ended in nightmare. When she returned to her room, she found a tray waiting on the small table by the window, bread, cheese, cold chicken, and a pot of tea that was still warm. Her stomach cramped at the sight of food, and she had to force herself to eat slowly, taking small bites even though she wanted to devour everything at once. Vernon had taught her what happened when you ate too fast after going hungry. The sickness, the pain, the waste of precious food. She wouldn't make that mistake. She was finishing the last of the tea when she heard boots on the stairs, a familiar measured tread. A knock came at her door, gentle but firm. "Miss Whitmore, it's Silas Granger. You decent?" Clara set down her teacup and smoothed the borrowed dress. "Yes, come in." Silas entered, removing his hat and ducking slightly through the door frame even though he didn't really need to. Old habit, maybe, or just the manners of a man who'd been taught not to presume. He carried a wrapped package under one arm and looked relieved to see her cleaned and fed. "You look better," he said, then immediately seemed to realize how that might sound. The food and the bath seem to have helped. Sorry, I ain't good with words." Despite everything, Clara felt a small smile tug at her lips. "It's all right. I know what you meant. And yes, thank you. The bath was... it was wonderful." Silas set the package on the bed, his movements careful, as if he was aware of how the simple act of a man entering a woman's room could be interpreted, how it might make her nervous. "I picked up some things while I was out," he said, gesturing to the package. "Nothing fancy, just some practical items Mrs. Henderson at the dry goods store recommended. Hairbrush, some hairpins, a shawl for evenings. Hope that's all right." Clara stared at the package, then at him. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." Silas turned his hat in his hands, studying the brim like it held answers to questions he hadn't asked yet. "But I figured you'd need them, and I had the money." He paused, then met her eyes. "Miss Whitmore, I want to talk to you about what happens next, if you're up for it." Clara's brief moment of peace evaporated, replaced by the cold reality of her situation. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap, and nodded. "I'm up for it." Silas pulled the room's single chair away from the wall and sat, maintaining a respectful distance. His long legs stretched out in front of him, boots dusty from his errands around town. "I've been thinking," he began, "about your situation." You got no family worth claiming, no money, no legal standing on your own. That about sum it up? Yes. The word was barely a whisper. Right. So here's the thing, and I want you to hear me out before you say anything, all right? Silas leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious. In the eyes of the law, you're still under Vernon's guardianship until you either turn 21 or get married. Vernon's already proven he's willing to sell you to settle debts. What's to stop him from trying again? Clara's hands clenched in her lap. She'd been trying not to think about that, but of course Silas was right. Vernon wouldn't just give up. He'd need money again. He always needed money, and she was the only asset he had left. I've been thinking about that, Clara admitted, but I don't know what to do. I can't stay hidden in this boarding house forever. Eventually, the money will run out. And Mrs. Chen will need the room, and Vernon will find me again. That's what I figured you'd be thinking. Silas took a deep breath, like a man about to dive into cold water. So I got a proposal for you. A real proposal, I mean. Not the kind Drummond was making in that square. Clara's breath caught. What kind of proposal? Marriage. The word hung in the air between them, simple and complicated all at once. A legal marriage, properly done, with a preacher and papers and everything. It would free you from Vernon's guardianship, give you legal protection, and make sure nobody can ever auction you off again. Clara felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. But we don't know each other. We met an hour ago. You can't possibly want to marry me. You're right, Silas said bluntly. I don't know you, and you sure as hell don't know me. And if we were talking about a regular marriage, the kind where two people fall in love and build a life together, I'd say we were both crazy to even consider it. But that's not what I'm proposing. Then what are you proposing? Silas met her gaze steadily. A marriage of convenience, on paper only. You'd have my name and my legal protection, but nothing else unless you wanted it. You'd have your own room at the ranch. We got a spare that's decent sized, got its own door that locks from the inside. You'd be free to come and go as you pleased, work if you wanted to or not, save money, make plans for your future. Think of it as buying yourself time to figure out what you really want out of life. Clara studied his face, looking for signs of deception, of hidden motives, of anything that would explain why a man would make such an offer. But all she saw was the same straightforward sincerity he'd shown in the square. Why would you do this? What do you get out of it? Honestly? Silas shrugged. Peace of mind. The satisfaction of knowing I did the right thing. And maybe... He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Maybe the knowledge that I'm not the same worthless drunk I used to be, that I'm capable of being the kind of man who helps people instead of hurting them. That's not much of a reason to marry someone. No, Silas agreed, but it's an honest one. And I'll tell you something else. I ain't looking for a wife in the traditional sense. I like my life the way it is. I work hard, I keep to myself, I don't need someone cooking for me or warming my bed or any of that. I can take care of myself just fine. But you? You need protection, and I can give that without it costing me anything I'm not willing to pay. Clara stood and walked to the window, looking out at Mrs. Chen's struggling garden. The vegetables were fighting for survival in the harsh Texas soil, putting down roots wherever they could find purchase. She felt a kinship with them, both trying to grow in hostile ground. You said it would be on paper only, she said quietly, not turning around. But people would talk. They'd expect. They'd assume things about us. Let them assume, Silas replied. As long as you and I know the truth, what does it matter what people think? It matters because reputations matter. Because if people think we're lying about the marriage being real, they might question its legality. They might find ways to invalidate it. Then we'd have to make it look real enough, Silas said. At least in public. We'd have to live in the same house, take meals together sometimes, maybe go to town together on occasion. But behind closed doors, that's our business and nobody else's. Clara turned to face him. And if I want to leave someday? If I decide I want a real marriage with someone else? Or I just want to be on my own? Then we get a divorce or an annulment, quietly, so it don't cause either of us too much trouble. Or we stay married on paper and you go live your life somewhere else. Whatever works. Silas stood, his full height making the small room feel even smaller. Look, I ain't trying to pressure you. This is just an option, one solution to a bad problem. You don't have to decide right now. Take a few days, think it over, ask me any questions you got. I have a question now, Clara said. All right. What happens if Vernon contests the marriage? He's still my legal guardian. Can't he claim you married me without his permission and have it annulled? Silas's expression darkened. He could try, but I already thought of that. Before I came here, I went to see Judge Morrison. He's the circuit judge, only comes through Bitter Creek once a month, but lucky for us, he's here this week. I asked him hypothetically, didn't mention you by name, about the legality of a guardianship when the guardian had attempted to sell his ward. You know what he said? Clara shook her head. He said that any guardian who attempted to sell his ward for personal profit had violated his fiduciary duty and could be stripped of guardianship rights. He said it right there in his office, clear as day. Silas's voice took on a harder edge. Vernon committed a crime today, Miss Whitmore. Maybe not one the law is going to prosecute him for. Too much gray area, too many men willing to say it was just a misunderstanding. But it's enough to invalidate his guardianship if we need it to be. Hope sparked in Claire's chest, small and fragile but real. So if we married, Vernon couldn't stop us. He could try. He could make noise, get a lawyer if he could afford one, which he can't. But in the end, no. He couldn't stop us. You'd be my wife, under my protection, and that's the end of it. Clara walked back to the bed and sat down, her mind racing through possibilities and consequences. A marriage of convenience, protection without obligation. Time to heal, to plan, to become someone other than Vernon's unwanted ward or Drummond's purchased property. What about your employer? She asked. This Mr. Bridger you mentioned. What will he think about you bringing home a sudden wife? Tom's a good man, Silas said. Open-minded, doesn't judge people by their circumstances. I already sent word to him about what happened today. Not asking permission, just letting him know. If he's got a problem with it, well, I'll deal with that. But I don't think he will. And the other ranch hands? Won't they wonder? Won't they gossip? Probably, Silas admitted, but most of them mind their own business. We got 3 other hands besides me. Charlie, who's old enough to be my father, and doesn't care about much except his horses. Miguel, who's got his own complicated past and doesn't judge. And a kid named Danny, who's too young and dumb to know what questions not to ask. They'll accept you because I tell them to, and if they don't, they can find work elsewhere. Clara twisted her hands together, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. This is all happening so fast. This morning I woke up in Vernon's wagon, and tonight you're asking me to marry you. How can I possibly make a decision like this in one day? You can't, Silas said simply. Or rather, you shouldn't have to. But the world don't always give us the luxury of time. Vernon's still in town, probably drunk by now, but he'll sober up eventually. Drummond's still angry about being shown up. Other men saw what happened and might get ideas about making their own offers. Every day you stay here unprotected is a day something could go wrong. He moved toward the door, then paused. But like I said, you don't have to decide tonight. Sleep on it. I'll be back tomorrow morning, and we can talk more then. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. Wait, Clara said as his hand touched the doorknob. If I said yes, hypothetically, how quickly could we do this? The marriage, I mean. Silas turned back, hope flickering in his dark eyes. Judge Morrison's in town for 3 more days. If you agreed, we could be married by tomorrow afternoon. It ain't romantic, and it ain't conventional, but it would be legal. Tomorrow afternoon. Less than 24 hours from now, she could be someone's wife. Someone who had already proven he'd protect her, who asked for nothing in return, who offered her something she thought was lost forever. Choice. I'll think about it, Clara said. Come back in the morning, like you said. I'll have an answer then, sir. Silas nodded, settled his hat on his head, and reached for the door again. But Clara stopped him with another question, this one driven by a need to understand the man offering her salvation. Mr. Granger, earlier you said you used to be a different person, a drunk, a gambler, someone who made all the wrong choices. What changed? What made you decide to be better? Silas was quiet for a long moment, his hand still on the doorknob, his back to her. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. I killed a man, he said quietly. in a gunfight in Abilene 7 years ago. He drew first. It was self-defense, completely legal. But he was just a kid, maybe 19 years old, drunk and stupid, and showing off for his friends. I was drunk too, angry at the world, looking for a reason to prove I was faster and meaner than anyone else. That kid died because I wasn't man enough to walk away from a fight that didn't need fighting. Clara heard the weight of that memory in his voice, the guilt that still haunted him. I stood over his body in the street, Silas continued, and I saw his mother come running. She fell on him screaming, and I knew in that moment that I'd become exactly the kind of man I'd always hated. The kind who takes more from the world than he gives. The kind who destroys things just because he can. He finally turned to look at her, and she saw the raw honesty in his eyes. That's when Tom Bridger found me. He was in town on business, saw the whole thing. Instead of condemning me or reporting me or any of the things I deserved, he offered me a job. Told me every man gets one chance to choose who he's going to be, and this was mine. I took it. Been trying to earn that second chance ever since. And today? Clara asked softly. Helping me? Was that part of earning it? Today was just about doing what was right, Silas said. But yeah, maybe it was part of it too. Maybe we don't ever stop earning our second chances. Maybe that's the point. We keep trying, keep doing better, until the day we die. He gave her a small, sad smile. Anyway, that's my story. Figured you should know it before you decide whether to tie your future to mine, even temporarily. I ain't a saint, Miss Whitmore. Just a man trying not to be a devil anymore. After he left, Clara sat in the gathering darkness of her small room and thought about choices. About the choice Vernon had stolen from her when he'd put her on that auction block. About the choice Drummond would have stolen if he'd succeeded in buying her. About the choice Silas was offering her now. Imperfect, complicated, but real. She thought about the kid Silas had killed, the mother's scream, the moment that had changed everything. She thought about how people became who they were through a series of choices and consequences, victories and failures, deaths and rebirths. Outside her window, the Texas night was falling, stars emerging one by one like pinpricks in a dark cloth. Somewhere in town, Vernon was drinking away the money he'd gotten for selling her. Somewhere else, Drummond was nursing his wounded pride and plotting revenge, maybe. And somewhere, in a ranch house 15 miles north, a man named Tom Bridger was reading a message about his ranch hand's sudden decision to marry a stranger. Clara unwrapped the package Silas had left and found the items he'd mentioned. A good sturdy hairbrush, a collection of practical hairpins, and a soft wool shawl in deep blue. But there was something else, too, wrapped separately at the bottom. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the paper to reveal a small silver ring, not fancy, not expensive, but clearly old and well-loved. A note fell out, written in Silas's careful hand. This was my mother's. She'd want you to have it if you say yes, not as a wedding ring necessarily, just as something that's yours, something nobody can take from you. S.G. Clara held the ring up to the lamplight, watching it catch and throw back tiny gleams. It was simple, unadorned, beautiful in its plainness. She slipped it onto her right hand, not her left, not yet, and felt its slight weight settling there like a promise. She didn't sleep that night, not really. She dozed fitfully, waking every hour to stare at the unfamiliar ceiling and wonder if she was making the right choice. Because she'd already made it, really, the moment Silas had told her about the kid he'd killed and the second chance he'd been given. She recognized something in his story, something essential. He understood what it meant to be remade, to become someone new out of the ashes of who you'd been. When dawn crept through her window, painting the room in shades of rose and gold, Clara was already dressed in her borrowed gray dress, her hair brushed and pinned with the practical pins Silas had bought. She wore his mother's ring on her right hand still, but she'd made her decision. The knock came at 8 o'clock, punctual and expected. Clara opened the door to find Silas standing there, hat in hand, looking like he hadn't slept much either. His eyes went immediately to the ring on her finger, and something in his expression shifted. Hope, or maybe just relief. "Morning, Miss Whitmore," he said quietly. "You come to a decision?" "I have," Clara replied. She took a breath, squared her shoulders, and met his gaze directly. "Yes, I'll marry you, on the terms you described, a marriage of convenience, protection, without obligation. And Mr. Granger, thank you for giving me a choice when nobody else would. Silas's shoulders relaxed slightly, tension she hadn't even realized he'd been carrying draining away. You don't have to thank me, he said, but I'm glad you said yes. I hope, this is going to work out for both of us. He glanced down the hallway, then back at her. You eaten breakfast? Not yet. Then let's go get some food, and we can talk about the practicalities. How's that sound? They went to a small diner 3 blocks from the boarding house, a place with checkered tablecloths and the smell of bacon grease permanently embedded in the walls. The few other patrons gave them curious looks. Silas Granger rarely came to town, and never with a woman, but nobody approached them. Over eggs and coffee, they worked out the details. They would go to Judge Morrison that afternoon at 2 o'clock. The ceremony would be brief, businesslike, witnessed by the judge's clerk and whoever else they could find. Afterward, they would register the marriage officially, making it legal and binding. Then they would ride to the Bridger Ranch, where Clara would begin her new life as Mrs. Silas Granger, in name, if not in practice. What should I bring with me? Clara asked, thinking of her nearly empty carpet bag back in her room at the boarding house. Whatever you have, Silas replied. But don't worry about not having much. We can get you more clothes and things as you need them. Tom pays decent, and I've been saving for years since I don't spend much on myself. I'll need to thank Mrs. Chen for the dress she lent me. Already taken care of, Silas said. I paid her for it this morning. It's yours now. Clara set down her coffee cup, overwhelmed again by this man's quiet generosity. You keep spending money on me. How am I ever supposed to— You ain't supposed to do anything, Silas interrupted gently. That's the point. This isn't a debt. It's just what people should do for each other. Help when help's needed. No strings, no expectations. They finished their breakfast in companionable silence, and Clara found herself studying her soon-to-be husband. He ate methodically, without wasting food, and kept his eyes mostly on his plate, occasionally glancing out the window as if checking for threats. A man accustomed to being watchful, to expecting trouble. But when he looked at her, his expression softened, losing some of that hard wariness. Can I ask you something personal? Clara ventured. Sure. Have you ever been married before, or engaged? Silas shook his head. No. Came close once, long time ago, before the war. Girl named Sarah Hutchins. We were going to get married when I came back, but he trailed off, his jaw tightening. I came back different, broken, mean. She took one look at what the war had made of me and married someone else. Can't say I blame her. I'm sorry. Don't be. She made the right choice. I was in no shape to be anyone's husband back then. He pushed his empty plate away. What about you? You ever been courted? Clara felt heat creep into her cheeks. Once. A boy in Missouri named James Parker. He worked at his father's mill. We walked out together a few times, and he talked about marriage. But then my father got sick and we had to move to be closer to doctors. I never saw James again. Last I heard, he'd married a girl from town. You sorry about that? No, Clara said honestly. I don't think I loved him. I was just lonely, and he was kind. That's not the same thing. No, Silas agreed. It ain't. At 2 o'clock, they stood in Judge Morrison's office, a cramped room above the bank that smelled of old paper and tobacco smoke. The judge was a barrel-chested man with impressive mutton chops and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. His clerk, a nervous young man named Timothy, served as their witness alongside Mrs. Chen, who had insisted on coming to make sure everything proper. The ceremony was brief and unromantic, just as Silas had predicted. Judge Morrison read the legal requirements in a bored tone, asked if they both consented freely to the marriage. Clara wondered if he knew about yesterday's auction, if he was making a point with that question, and pronounced them husband and wife when they both said yes. There was no kiss, no exchange of rings beyond Clara moving her mother-in-law's ring to her left hand, no celebration, just signatures on paper and the scratch of the judge's pen making it official. Congratulations, Judge Morrison said dryly. Mr. Granger, Mrs. Granger, you're now legally wed. Try not to kill each other before my next circuit. He handed Silas the marriage certificate. File this with the county clerk. You'll need it for legal purposes. Outside the judge's office, Clara stood on the wooden sidewalk and stared at the marriage certificate in Silas's hands. Her name was on it now, linked forever to his. Clara Granger. It looked strange, written out like that, this new identity she'd taken on. You all right? Silas asked quietly. I don't know, Clara admitted. I feel like I should feel something more. Like getting married should be momentous, even if it's a marriage like ours. But mostly, I just feel numb. That's probably normal, Silas said. Given everything you've been through, the feelings will come later, I expect. Good ones and bad ones both. He carefully folded the certificate and put it in his pocket. Ready to head to the ranch? Clara looked around Bitter Creek one last time. The dusty main street, the weathered buildings, the auction square where yesterday her life had nearly ended. She thought about Vernon somewhere in this town, probably hung over and broke again. She thought about Drummond, nursing his wounded pride. She thought about all the people who had watched her humiliation and done nothing. I'm ready, she said. Let's go home. The word felt strange on her tongue. Home. She hadn't had a real home since her father died, just places she'd been forced to stay, places that barely tolerated her presence. Could a ranch she'd never seen, owned by a man she'd never met, worked by strangers, really become home? With a husband who wasn't really a husband? But as Silas helped her onto his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Chester, and they rode out of Bitter Creek toward the open plains, Clara felt something shift inside her. Not quite hope, not yet, but maybe the possibility of hope. The first green shoot pushing up through scorched earth. The landscape changed as they rode north, the harsh scrubland giving way gradually to rolling prairie dotted with mesquite and live oak. Cattle grazed in the distance, lazy movements in the afternoon heat. Hawks wheeled overhead, hunting for prey. The sky stretched endless and blue, bigger than any sky Clara had ever seen in Missouri. It's beautiful, she said, breaking the silence they'd ridden in for the past hour. It is, Silas agreed. Harsh sometimes, unforgiving when it wants to be, but beautiful. I think that's why I stayed. Even when things were bad, even when I hated myself, this land never judged me, just kept being what it was. They crested a low hill, and Silas pointed toward a cluster of buildings in a valley below. There. That's the Bridger Ranch. Home. Clara's breath caught as she took in the sight of what would now be her home. The main ranch house was a sturdy two-story structure built from local limestone, its walls thick enough to keep out the worst of the Texas heat. A wide porch wrapped around the front, shaded by a sloping roof that had clearly been added after the original construction. Beyond the house stood a large barn painted red by time and weather, several smaller outbuildings she couldn't identify, and a series of corrals where horses moved lazily in the afternoon sun. It wasn't grand, but it was solid, well-maintained, speaking of people who took pride in their work. As they rode closer, Clara noticed a man emerging from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He was older than she'd expected, perhaps in his late 50s, with silver threading through dark hair and a weathered face that had seen decades of sun and wind. He wore simple working clothes and moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had begun to remind him of past injuries and hard years. That's Tom Bridger, Silas said quietly, the man who gave me my second chance. Tom stopped at the fence, his eyes moving from Silas to Clara with an expression that was impossible to read. Clara felt her stomach tighten with nervousness. This man's opinion mattered to Silas, which meant it would matter to her life here. If Tom Bridger decided she was unwelcome, where would she go? Back to Bitter Creek? Back to Vernon? Silas dismounted first, then reached up to help Clara down. His hands on her waist were impersonal, steadying, gone as soon as her feet touched ground. They approached Tom together, and Clara was acutely aware of how she must look. Dusty from travel, wearing a borrowed dress, standing beside a man she'd married only hours after meeting him. Tom, Silas said, his voice carrying a respect Clara hadn't heard before. This is Clara, my wife. Clara, this is Tom Bridger, owner of this ranch and the best man I've ever known. Tom's eyes widened slightly at the word wife, but he recovered quickly. He pulled off his work glove and extended his hand to Clara. Ma'am, he said, his voice gravelly but not unkind. Welcome to the Bridger Ranch. Though I'll admit Silas's message yesterday didn't prepare me for quite how quickly things would develop. Clara shook his hand, finding his grip firm but not crushing. Mr. Bridger, I understand this must seem strange. Silas and our circumstances are unusual. Most circumstances worth talking about are unusual, Tom replied. He studied her face for a long moment, and Clara forced herself not to look away. I heard what happened in town yesterday. News travels fast, even out here. Vernon Whitmore ought to be horsewhipped for what he tried to do to you. You know Vernon? Clara asked, surprised. Know of him. Man like that makes a reputation quick enough. Tom's expression darkened. He came through here about a year back, tried to sell me a horse he claimed was his. Turned out he'd stolen it from a ranch near San Antonio. I sent him packing and reported him to the sheriff, not that it did much good. Silas shifted beside her. Tom, I know bringing Clara here without proper warning wasn't ideal. If it's going to cause problems... Did I say it was going to cause problems? Tom interrupted, his tone sharp but not angry. I'm just trying to understand the situation so I can figure out how to help. He looked at Clara again. You running from something, ma'am? Besides Vernon, I mean? Clara appreciated his directness. No, sir. Just trying to survive. Silas offered me a way to do that, and I took it. Marriage of convenience, then. The bluntness of the question should have embarrassed Clara, but instead she felt a strange relief. Tom Bridger wasn't going to dance around the truth or pretend not to see what was obvious. Yes, sir. Silas has been very clear about the terms. This is a legal arrangement to protect me from my step-uncle's guardianship. Nothing more. Nothing more yet, Tom said thoughtfully. Things have a way of getting complicated, whether we plan for them to or not. He turned to Silas. You thought this through? Really thought it through. Because once people in town know you're married, they're going to expect certain things. They're going to watch you, talk about you, make judgments about whether this marriage is real or just a convenience. And if they decide it ain't real, they might try to challenge it. Let them try, Silas said, his voice taking on that dangerous edge Clara had heard in the town square. The marriage is legal, properly witnessed, filed with the county. Vernon's got no legal standing to contest it, not after what he did. Maybe not legally, Tom agreed. But socially? That's different. You're asking Clara to live here, work here, exist in a community that's going to have opinions about her. You sure you want to put her through that? Clara spoke before Silas could respond. Mr. Bridger, I appreciate your concern, but I'd rather face gossip than face another auction block. Silas offered me dignity and choice when no one else would. Whatever social consequences come from that, I'll deal with them. Tom's expression softened slightly, something that might have been approval flickering in his eyes. Fair enough. But you should know what you're walking into. This ranch employs 4 men, including Silas. 3 of them are good men who'll treat you with respect. But we're 15 miles from town, which means you're going to be isolated. You're going to be the only woman here most days, surrounded by men you don't know. That going to be a problem? I don't know yet, Clara said honestly. But I'd rather be surrounded by strangers than by Vernon Whitmore. Can't argue with that. Tom glanced toward the house, then back at them. All right, here's how this is going to work. Clara, you'll have the spare room on the 2nd floor like Silas probably already told you. It's got a good lock, and I'll make sure everyone knows your privacy is to be respected. You don't owe nobody here anything. Not labor, not explanations, nothing. You want to work? There's plenty to do. You want to hide in your room for a month while you figure things out? That's fine too. I'd like to work, Clara said quickly. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I'd rather be useful than be a burden. You ain't a burden, Silas said quietly. But if you want to work, there's cooking that needs doing, mending, garden work if you're interested. Clara's educated too, Tom. She can read and write better than most. Tom raised an eyebrow. That's so. Well, that opens up some possibilities. I've been meaning to get someone to help with the ranch accounts. My eyes ain't what they used to be, and I keep making mistakes in the ledgers. He looked at Clara. You any good with numbers? I helped my father with his store accounts for years, Clara replied. He taught me bookkeeping when I was young. Then we'll work something out. Fair wage for fair work. Tom extended his hand again. Welcome to the Bridger Ranch, Mrs. Granger. I hope you find what you're looking for here. As Clara shook his hand again, she felt some of the tension she'd been carrying since yesterday begin to ease. Tom Bridger wasn't offering her pity or charity. He was offering her respect, work, and a place to belong. It was more than she dared hope for. The sound of boots on hard-packed earth made them all turn. 3 men were approaching from different directions, clearly drawn by the sight of Silas returning with a woman. The oldest was a weathered man with a shock of white hair and bow legs that spoke of decades in the saddle. He moved slowly but steadily, his eyes sharp despite his age. The second was younger, perhaps 30, with dark skin and darker eyes, wearing a faded blue shirt and a bandana around his neck. The third was barely more than a boy, maybe 17 or 18, tall and gangly with red hair and freckles scattered across sunburned skin. "Speak of the devils," Tom muttered. "All right, let's get the introductions done. Charlie, Miguel, Danny. This is Clara Granger, Silas's wife. Clara, these are the other hands who work this ranch." Charlie, the old man, removed his hat and nodded respectfully. "Ma'am, pleasure to meet you." His voice was rough as gravel but not unfriendly. Miguel's reaction was more reserved. He studied Clara with careful eyes, taking in her appearance, her proximity to Silas, the newness of the situation. "Welcome," he said finally, his English accented with Spanish. "I hope you will be happy here." Danny, the kid, just stared with his mouth slightly open until Charlie elbowed him in the ribs. "Oh, welcome, ma'am. I mean, Mrs. Granger. He flushed bright red, making his freckles even more prominent. "Sorry, I ain't never seen Silas with a woman before. Didn't even know he was courting anyone." "That's because I wasn't," Silas said dryly. "It's a recent development, and Danny, quit staring. You're making her uncomfortable." "Sorry, ma'am." Danny dropped his gaze to his boots, looking mortified. Despite her nervousness, Clara felt a smile tugging at her lips. The boy's awkwardness was somehow endearing, a reminder that not all men were like Vernon or Drummond. "It's all right," she said gently. "I'm sure this is surprising for all of you." "Surprising's one word for it," Charlie said, his keen eyes moving between Clara and Silas. "But Tom's rules apply same as always. We treat folks with respect here. We don't pry into business that ain't ours, and we judge people by their actions, not their circumstances. You're Silas's wife. That makes you family here. Simple as that." The word family hit Clara harder than she expected. She'd lost her family when her father died, had been adrift ever since, belonging nowhere and to no one. Now this old cowboy was casually declaring her part of his family, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. "That means more than you know." Miguel nodded slowly, still watching her with that careful assessment. "You know how to ride?" he asked suddenly. Clara blinked at the unexpected question. "I used to. My father taught me when I was young, but it's been years." "Then I teach you again," Miguel said. "Out here, you need to ride. For work, for safety, for freedom. I have a good mare. Very gentle, very patient. Her name is Luna." "That's very kind of you," Clara said, surprised by the offer. Miguel shrugged. "Not kind. Practical. You cannot live on a ranch and not ride. Besides, Luna needs someone. She gets lonely." Tom clapped his hands together, breaking the moment. "All right, that's enough standing around. We got work to finish before sundown. Silas, why don't you show Clara to her room? Let her get settled. We'll have supper at 6 in the main house. Clara, if you're up to joining us, you're welcome. If you'd rather take a tray in your room, that's fine too." "I'll join you," Clara said. The thought of eating alone in an unfamiliar room, hiding away like she had something to be ashamed of, made her stomach turn. She'd hidden enough in Vernon's house. Here, she would face things directly. Silas picked up her small carpet bag. Everything she owned in the world fit in one bag now, and led her toward the house. As they climbed the porch steps, Clara noticed details she'd missed from a distance. A rocking chair worn smooth by years of use, flower boxes under the windows that held struggling geraniums, a horseshoe nailed above the door for luck. The door itself was solid oak, weathered but well-maintained, and it swung open with a faint creak that spoke of regular use. The interior was cooler than outside, the thick limestone walls doing their job. They entered directly into a large main room that served multiple purposes: sitting area, dining area, and what looked like Tom's office space, judging by the desk piled with papers in one corner. The furniture was simple but solid, built for use rather than show. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, currently cold but clearly well used during winter months. The floor was wide plank wood, scarred and scuffed but clean. Kitchen's through there, Silas said, pointing to a doorway on the left. Tom usually cooks for everyone, but we all help out. There's no formal arrangement. Whoever's got time makes food, and we eat together when we can. Sometimes we're all on different schedules with the ranch work, so don't feel obligated to wait for everyone. He led her up a narrow staircase to the second floor. The hallway was dim, lit only by a window at the far end, and Clara counted 4 doors. Silas stopped at the second one on the right. "This is your room," he said, pulling a key from his pocket and unlocking the door. "Only 2 keys exist. This one's yours, and I gave the spare to Tom for safekeeping. Nobody else has access." He pushed the door open and stepped aside to let her enter first. The room was larger than she'd expected, easily twice the size of her room at Mrs. Chen's boarding house. A double bed with an iron frame stood against one wall, covered with a quilt that had seen better days but was clean and neatly made. A wardrobe, a washstand with pitcher and basin, a small writing desk with a chair, and a trunk at the foot of the bed completed the furnishings. 2 windows looked out over the ranch yard, and Clara could see the corrals and part of the barn from here. "It ain't fancy," Silas said, sounding almost apologetic. "But it's private and secure. My room's at the end of the hall if you need anything, but I won't bother you unless you ask me to." Clara set her carpetbag on the bed and turned to face him. They were alone together in a bedroom for the first time as a married couple, and the awareness of that fact hung in the air between them. But Silas maintained a respectful distance, his hat in his hands, his posture careful and non-threatening. "Where does Tom sleep?" Clara asked, more to break the silence than because she needed to know. "He's got a room downstairs off the kitchen. Says his old bones can't handle stairs anymore, though I think he's tougher than he lets on." Silas gestured to the wardrobe. "There's some blankets and extra linens in there, and I put some soap and towels on the washstand. If you need anything else, just let me know, or tell Tom. He's better at figuring out what people need than I am." "This is perfect," Clara said honestly. "Thank you, Silas, for all of this." He shifted uncomfortably, clearly unused to gratitude. "You already thanked me enough. Just try to be comfortable here, all right? I know it's all strange and new, but it'll get easier." After he left, closing the door quietly behind him, Clara stood in the center of her new room and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 36 hours. Sold, saved, married, relocated. Her entire life had been dismantled and rebuilt in less than 2 days. The woman who had woken up in Vernon's wagon yesterday morning felt like a stranger, someone from another lifetime. She unpacked her carpetbag slowly, taking inventory of her meager possessions. 2 more dresses, both as worn as the one she'd discarded at Mrs. Chen's, a hairbrush with several broken bristles, a small Bible that had been her mother's, a tarnished locket containing a tiny photograph of her parents on their wedding day. The items Silas had bought her, the good hairbrush, the pins, the shawl. That was everything. 23 years of life reduced to objects that barely filled a single drawer. She was arranging her things in the wardrobe when a knock came at her door. "Clara, it's me, Silas. I got something for you." She opened the door to find him holding an armful of fabric. "These belong to Tom's wife, Mary," he explained. "She passed about 5 years ago, cancer. Tom's been meaning to do something with her clothes, but couldn't bring himself to get rid of them. He asked me to ask you if you'd like them. Says Mary was about your size and she'd want her things to be useful rather than sitting in a trunk collecting dust." Clara took the clothes carefully, feeling the weight of this gesture. These weren't just dresses and shawls. They were a dead woman's possessions, offered to a stranger by a man still grieving his wife. "Are you sure Tom wants to part with these?" "He wouldn't have offered if he wasn't sure. Tom don't do things he don't mean." Silas paused. "Mary was a good woman, kind, strong, practical. You remind me of her a little bit. I think she'd approve of Tom helping you." After Silas left again, Clara laid out the dresses on her bed and examined them. They were simple but well-made, practical garments for ranch life. Sturdy cotton in sensible colors, nothing fancy but nothing shameful either. A few were faded from washing and wear, but they were whole and clean. More importantly, they were hers now, freely given rather than stolen or sold or bargained for. She changed into one of Mary's dresses, a dark green cotton that fit reasonably well with only minor adjustments needed. When she looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because she looked different, but because she looked dignified, like a person who belonged somewhere, who had rights and respect and a place in the world. The afternoon passed slowly as Clara explored her room and watched ranch life unfold outside her windows. She saw Charlie working with horses in the corral, his movements patient and sure despite his age. Miguel was repairing fence somewhere out of sight, but she could hear the rhythmic sound of hammer on wood. Danny was hauling water, his young muscles straining with the weight of the buckets. And Silas, she spotted him in the barn, moving in and out of view as he worked at tasks she couldn't identify from this distance. At 6 o'clock, she made her way downstairs, following the sounds and smells of cooking. The kitchen was larger than the main room, dominated by a massive cast-iron stove that radiated heat despite the evening warmth. Tom stood at the counter, slicing bread with surprising skill for a man who claimed his eyes were failing. He looked up when Clara entered and gestured to the table. "Have a seat. We eat simple here. Beef stew tonight, bread and some canned peaches if anyone's got room for dessert. Nothing fancy, but it fills the belly." "Can I help?" Clara asked. "Can you set the table? Plates are in that cupboard, silverware in the drawer below." Clara found the dishes and began laying them out, noting that the table could seat 8 comfortably. She counted only 6 people on the ranch, which meant the table had been chosen for future expansion or past gatherings that no longer happened. As she worked, Tom watched her with those shrewd eyes. "You settling in all right?" he asked. "Yes, sir. The room is wonderful. And thank you for the dresses. That was very generous." Tom grunted, turning back to his stew. Mary would have wanted it. She never could stand seeing someone in need when she had the means to help. He stirred the pot thoughtfully. "You're probably wondering why an old widower like me is running a ranch instead of selling it and retiring to town." "It's not my business," Clara said diplomatically. "No, but you're living here now, so you should know." Tom ladled stew into a serving bowl. "Mary and I bought this land 30 years ago when it was nothing but scrub and hope. We built this house with our own hands, raised cattle, raised hell when we had to. We never had kids. Mary couldn't carry a pregnancy to term, lost 3 babies before the doctors told us to stop trying. Nearly broke us both, but we survived it. This ranch became our child, in a way. Everything we built, everything we dreamed, it's all here in this land." He carried the bowl to the table and met Clara's eyes. "When Mary died, folks expected me to sell out, move to town, live out my days playing checkers with other old men. But I couldn't do it. This place is Mary's legacy as much as mine. Long as I'm breathing, I'm going to keep it alive. That's why I take on men like Silas, men who need second chances, who need a place to prove their worth more than their worst mistakes. Mary would have done the same." Clara understood then that she wasn't the first person Tom Bridger had helped, and she probably wouldn't be the last. This ranch was more than a business. It was a refuge, a place where broken people could become whole again. The others filed in one by one, washing up at the sink before taking their seats. Silas sat across from Clara, giving her an encouraging nod. Charlie took the chair at the far end, moving stiffly after a day on horseback. Miguel and Danny filled in the remaining spots, and Tom took the head of the table with the easy authority of a man accustomed to leading. "Before we eat," Tom said, his voice cutting through the low conversation, "I want to say something. Clara's going to be living here now, working with us, being part of this ranch. I expect everyone to treat her with respect and make her feel welcome. She's had a rough time lately, and she don't need anybody making it rougher. Anyone got a problem with that? Speak now or keep your peace forever." Silence fell around the table. Then Charlie raised his water glass. "To Clara," he said simply. "Welcome to the family." The others raised their glasses, water, coffee, nothing stronger, and echoed the sentiment. Clara felt her throat tighten with emotion. These men barely knew her, had no reason to accept her, yet they were offering her exactly what she'd lost when her father died: belonging. The meal was simple but delicious, and the conversation flowed easily around ranch business, weather predictions, and gentle teasing between the men. Danny tried to impress Clara with a story about breaking a particularly stubborn horse, but Charlie interrupted with the truth. The horse had broken Danny's pride more than Danny had broken the horse. Everyone laughed, including Danny, and Clara found herself relaxing despite her nervousness. "So, Mrs. Granger," Miguel said, his accent making the formal address sound almost elegant. "What did you do before you came here? Besides surviving, I mean." "I helped my father run a general store in Missouri," Clara replied. "I kept the books, ordered stock, dealt with suppliers. I can calculate profit margins in my head faster than most people can do it on paper. That's a useful skill, Tom said. We could use someone with a head for numbers. I've been running this ranch by instinct and luck for too long. I also sew, Clara added, and I can read and write in French. My mother was from New Orleans and insisted I learn. French? Danny's eyes widened. You mean like the language? That's generally what French means, boy, Charlie said dryly. I just never met nobody who spoke French before, Danny protested. Say something in French, Mrs. Granger. Clara felt herself blushing, but obliged. Je suis heureuse d'être ici, même si les circonstances qui m'ont amené sont difficiles. What's that mean? Danny asked eagerly. It means I'm happy to be here, even though the circumstances that brought me are difficult. Clara smiled slightly. My mother used to say that French was the language of complicated feelings. She might have been right. After supper, Clara helped Tom wash the dishes despite his protests that she didn't have to. The kitchen cleanup gave them a chance to talk more privately, while the other men dispersed to evening chores or their own rooms. You did good tonight, Tom said as he handed her a wet plate to dry. I know it wasn't easy, sitting down with a bunch of strange men and pretending everything's normal. It was easier than I expected, Clara admitted. Everyone's been kind. They're good men, mostly. Charlie's been with me for 15 years, best horse trainer in 3 counties, though his body's starting to give out on him. Miguel came here 3 years ago, running from some trouble down in Mexico. Never asked him what kind of trouble, and he never volunteered. Danny's the newest, only been here 6 months. He's young and dumb, but eager to learn. And Silas? Clara asked, unable to help herself. Tom was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Silas is complicated. He came here 7 years ago, like I told you earlier, fresh from killing that kid in Abilene, drunk and angry and hating himself. First year he was here, I wasn't sure he'd make it. He'd disappear for days sometimes, come back looking like death, wouldn't talk to nobody. But slowly, he started to change, started to believe he could be something other than what he'd been. Tom handed her another plate. He's the best worker I've got now, most reliable, most skilled. He can do anything that needs doing on a ranch. Break horses, mend fences, deliver calves, fix machinery. But more than that, he's become a good man, the kind of man who steps in when someone needs help, even when it costs him. Like yesterday, Claire said softly. Like yesterday, Tom agreed. And like today, marrying you to keep you safe. That takes a special kind of courage, Mrs. Granger. Not the kind you use in a gunfight, but the kind you use when you decide to tie your life to another person's problems because it's the right thing to do. Clara dried the last plate in silence, thinking about Silas's courage and Tom's words. When they finished, Tom poured himself a cup of coffee and gestured for her to join him at the kitchen table. I want to talk to you about something, he said, his tone serious. Something important. Clara sat, her hands folded in her lap, suddenly nervous again. All right, look, you and Silas got married for practical reasons. I understand that. But people in town don't know that. And when they find out about the marriage, they're going to talk. They're going to speculate about whether it's real, why it happened so fast, what Silas's intentions are. Tom sipped his coffee. Some of that talk's going to be mean. Some of it's going to reach Vernon, and he's going to get ideas about challenging the marriage or causing trouble. Silas said the marriage is legal, Clara said, that Vernon can't contest it. Legally, maybe not, but there are other ways to cause problems. Vernon could spread rumors, claim Silas coerced you or tricked you. He could try to get the church involved, claim the marriage is immoral. He could even get violent if he's drunk enough and desperate enough. Tom leaned forward. What I'm saying is you need to be careful. When you go to town, don't go alone. Don't give Vernon any opportunity to corner you or hurt you. And if anyone asks about your marriage, keep your story simple and consistent. What should I say? That you and Silas met, courted briefly, and decided to marry. That it was your choice, freely made. Don't mention the auction. Don't mention Vernon's gambling debts. Don't give anyone ammunition to use against you. Tom's expression softened slightly. I know it feels like lying, but sometimes protecting yourself means keeping your truth private. Clara nodded slowly, understanding the wisdom in his words. I can do that. Good. Tom stood, draining his coffee. Now, I imagine you're tired after everything that's happened. Go on up to your room, get some rest. Tomorrow's Sunday, so we don't work except for essential chores. You can sleep in, explore the ranch, do whatever you want. Monday we'll start figuring out what your role here's going to be. Clara climbed the stairs to her room, feeling the full weight of exhaustion settling into her bones. She changed into a nightgown, another item from Mary's trunk, and sat on the edge of her bed, staring out the window at the darkening sky. Stars were emerging, more than she'd ever seen in her life, scattered across the darkness like diamonds on black velvet. A soft knock came at her door. "Clara, you still awake?" She opened it to find Silas standing in the hallway, still fully dressed, looking uncertain. "I just wanted to check on you," he said. "Make sure you're all right. First day in a new place can be overwhelming." "I'm all right," Clara said. "Tired, but all right. Everyone's been very welcoming." "Good. That's good." Silas shifted his weight. "Listen, I know this whole situation is strange. We're married, but we're strangers, living under the same roof but in separate worlds. I just want you to know, if you ever need anything, even just someone to talk to, I'm here. No judgment, no expectations." "Thank you," Clara said. "That means a lot." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Two people bound by law but separated by circumstance, trying to figure out how to navigate this new reality they'd created. "Well," Silas finally said, "I'll let you get some rest." "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Silas." She closed the door and turned the key in the lock, hearing the satisfying click of the mechanism engaging. For the first time in 6 months, she had a door that locked with her on the safe side of it. For the first time since her father died, she had a room of her own, a place where nobody could enter without her permission. Clara climbed into bed and pulled the quilt up to her chin, feeling the unfamiliar comfort of clean sheets and a mattress that didn't sag in the middle. Outside her window, the ranch settled into night rhythms, the soft sounds of horses moving in the barn, the distant howl of a coyote, the whisper of wind through mesquite trees. She thought about everything Tom had said about protecting herself, about keeping her truth private, about the dangers that still lurked in the form of Vernon Whitmore and public opinion. She thought about Silas in his room at the end of the hall, a man carrying his own burdens, his own past, his own demons. She thought about the strange family she'd found herself part of, an old widower, a reformed gunfighter, a mysterious Mexican, a weathered horseman, and a naive kid. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adjustments, new lessons to learn about ranch life and her place in it. But tonight, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara Granger now, felt something that had been absent from her life for months. She felt safe. Clara woke to birdsong and golden light streaming through her windows, disoriented for a moment by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then memory returned. The ranch, the marriage, the new life she'd stumbled into like a woman falling through a trapdoor into unexpected salvation. She lay still for several minutes, listening to the sounds of the ranch coming to life outside. Men's voices calling to each other, horses nickering for their breakfast, the creak of the barn door opening and closing. Sunday morning. A day of rest, Tom had said, though Clara suspected that rest on a working ranch was relative. Animals still needed feeding, water still needed hauling, life still demanded attention regardless of what day the calendar claimed it was. She dressed in another of Mary's dresses, this one a faded blue that reminded her of Missouri skies, and made her way downstairs. The house was quiet, and she found the kitchen empty except for a pot of coffee keeping warm on the stove and a note in Tom's blocky handwriting. "Help yourself to breakfast. Biscuits in the tin, bacon staying warm in the oven. We're doing morning chores." Clara poured herself coffee and sat at the kitchen table, eating slowly while watching through the window as ranch life unfolded. She could see Silas in the corral with Charlie, the two of them working with a young horse that was clearly still learning its manners. Silas moved with patient confidence, his voice too low to hear, but his gestures calm and encouraging. The horse, a pretty chestnut with white socks, tossed its head and danced sideways, but Silas simply waited, giving the animal time to settle before trying again. "He's good with them," a voice said behind her, and Clara jumped, nearly spilling her coffee. Miguel stood in the kitchen doorway, his dark eyes apologetic. "Sorry, I did not mean to startle you." "It's all right," Clara said, pressing a hand to her racing heart. "I just didn't hear you come in." Miguel moved to pour himself coffee, his movements economical and graceful. Silas, with the horses. He has patience. Many men try to force a horse to obey, use fear and pain, but Silas, he convinces them, makes them want to cooperate. He sat across from her, cradling his cup. It is a rare gift. Clara looked back out the window, watching as the chestnut finally allowed Silas to approach, standing still while he ran his hands over its neck and shoulders. He seems to be a rare man in general, she said softly. Yes, Miguel agreed, though he does not believe this about himself. He still sees the man he was, not the man he has become. He sipped his coffee thoughtfully. I understand this feeling. I also was someone else before I came here, someone I am not proud of. Clara sensed an offering in his words, a shared vulnerability meant to make her feel less alone. What were you before? She asked carefully, unsure if the question was welcome. Miguel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. A soldier, he finally said, for a man in Mexico who called himself a revolutionary but was really just a bandit with political ambitions. I did things that seemed necessary at the time but haunt me now. When I could no longer justify the violence, I left, came north looking for a place where my past would not follow me. And you found it here? I found something better than hiding, Miguel said. I found people who gave me a chance to be someone new. Tom, Silas, Charlie. They do not ask about my past. They judge me by my work, my character, who I am today. It is a gift I do not take lightly. He stood, rinsing his cup at the sink. I tell you this because you also are becoming someone new. The woman who was sold in that town square, she does not have to define you. Here, you can choose who you will be. After Miguel left, Clara remained at the table, thinking about his words. Becoming someone new, the idea was both terrifying and intoxicating. She'd spent 6 months under Vernon's roof being diminished, reduced, stripped of identity and agency. Before that, she'd been her father's daughter, defined by his needs and expectations, even though he'd loved her well. Who was Clara Whitmore, Clara Granger, when she was free to choose? She was washing her breakfast dishes when Danny burst through the kitchen door, his red hair wild and his freckled face flushed with excitement. Mrs. Granger, come quick! Luna's foaling, and Miguel says you should see it. Clara's hand stilled in the dishwater. Foaling? Now? Yes, ma'am. Miguel says it's going smooth, but you should see it anyway. Says every person should see a birth at least once in their life. Danny was practically bouncing with enthusiasm. Come on, it's real beautiful. She dried her hands quickly and followed Danny across the yard to the barn. Inside, the air was warm and close, smelling of hay and horses and something primal and ancient. Miguel stood outside one of the larger stalls, his posture relaxed but attentive. Through the slats, Clara could see a gray mare lying on her side in fresh straw, her belly heaving with contractions. Luna, Miguel said softly as Clara approached. She is doing well. First foal, but she knows what to do. Nature teaches what we cannot. Clara watched in silent awe as the mare labored, her body working with ancient instinct. The foal emerged slowly, first a small muzzle, then front legs folded like a prayer, then a rush of fluid and membrane and new life tumbling into the straw. Luna immediately turned to her baby, nickering low and urgent, licking the foal clean with long strokes of her tongue. It's a colt, Miguel said with quiet satisfaction. Strong. You see how he already tries to lift his head? He will be a good one. Clara felt tears streaming down her face without quite knowing why. Maybe it was the raw beauty of the moment, life asserting itself against all odds. Maybe it was the fierce tenderness in Luna's attention to her baby, the way she cleaned him and encouraged him with soft sounds. Or maybe it was simply that after days of fear and uncertainty and loss, Claire was finally witnessing something pure and hopeful and untainted by human cruelty. Why are you crying? Danny asked, genuinely confused. It's happy, ain't it? The foal's healthy and Luna's fine. Sometimes we cry because we're happy, Clara said, wiping at her cheeks. Sometimes beauty overwhelms us. The colt was struggling to stand now, his long legs tangling comically as he fought against gravity and inexperience. He fell twice, 3 times, but each time he tried again with stubborn determination. On the 4th attempt, he managed to get all 4 legs beneath him and stood swaying, his small body trembling with effort but upright, triumphant. "There," Miguel said with satisfaction. "Life insists on itself, always. Remember this, Clara. When things seem too hard, when you think you cannot stand, life insists." They left Luna and her colt to bond in privacy, and Clara emerged from the barn to find Silas walking toward her, his shirt dusty and his hat pushed back on his head. He stopped when he saw her face, concern flickering across his features. "You all right? Danny said Miguel took you to see the foaling." "I'm fine," Clara said, and realized it was true. It was beautiful. I've never seen anything like it. Silas's expression softened. "First birth is always special. Reminds you that the world keeps turning, keeps making new things even when the old things are falling apart." He gestured toward the house. "I was going to head into town this afternoon, pick up some supplies we need. Thought you might want to come along, maybe pick out some things for yourself. But if you'd rather stay here, that's fine too." Clara's first instinct was to refuse, to avoid Bitter Creek and the possibility of seeing Vernon or Drummond or anyone who'd witnessed her humiliation. But then she remembered Tom's advice about not hiding, about maintaining the fiction of a normal marriage, and Miguel's words about choosing who she would be. "I'll come," she said, lifting her chin. "I'm not going to hide from that town." They left after lunch, riding together on Chester since Clara wasn't ready yet to handle a horse on her own. She sat behind Silas, her arms around his waist for balance, acutely aware of the intimacy of the position, even though it was purely practical. He was warm and solid beneath her touch, his back straight and his movements easy in the saddle. The ride to Bitter Creek took about an hour, following a well-worn trail through mesquite and scrub. Silas kept Chester to an easy pace, occasionally pointing out landmarks or features of the landscape. A reliable water source, a place where cattle like to gather, the boundary line between Bridger's ranch and the neighboring property. "That's the Morrison place," Silas said, gesturing toward a distant cluster of buildings. "They run sheep instead of cattle, which makes them unpopular with some ranchers. But they're good neighbors, keep to themselves, don't cause trouble." "Do you know them?" "Tom does. I've met them a few times. They got 3 daughters, all married off now to men from back east. Mrs. Morrison talks sometimes about how lonely it is with her girls gone." He was quiet for a moment. "Loneliness is hard out here. The land's so big and empty, and people are spread so thin. That's why communities matter so much, why folks need each other even when they don't always like each other." As they approached Bitter Creek, Clara felt her stomach tightening with anxiety. The town looked different in daylight than it had during her ordeal. Smaller, more ordinary, less like the hellscape of her nightmares. People moved along the main street going about their Sunday business, visiting with neighbors, heading to or from church services. Silas guided Chester to the hitching post outside Morrison's general store, no relation to the sheep ranchers, apparently, and helped Clara dismount. She was stiff from the ride, her legs unsteady, but she forced herself to stand tall as Silas offered his arm. "Remember," he said quietly, "we're married. You're my wife. You belong here just as much as anyone else." They entered the store together, and Clara felt every eye in the place turned toward them. The shopkeeper, a plump woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, stopped mid-sentence in her conversation with another customer. 2 men examining tools near the back exchanged glances. A young woman with a baby on her hip stared openly. "Well," the shopkeeper said, recovering first, "if it isn't Silas Granger, haven't seen you in town in weeks. Who's this you've brought with you?" "Mrs. Morrison," Silas said with careful politeness. "I'd like you to meet my wife, Clara. We were married Friday by Judge Morrison." The silence that followed was profound. Clara could practically see thoughts racing behind Mrs. Morrison's eyes, calculations, assessments, the rapid assembly of gossip that would be shared as soon as they left. "Your wife," Mrs. Morrison repeated slowly. "Well, that's quite sudden, isn't it? I don't recall hearing about any courtship." "It was quick," Silas agreed, his voice level. "But we knew what we wanted. Sometimes that's how it happens." "Indeed." Mrs. Morrison's gaze swept over Clara, taking in Mary Bridger's old dress, the simple way Clara had pinned her hair. the nervous way she stood slightly behind Silas. "And where are you from, Mrs. Granger?" "Missouri," Clara said, finding her voice. "I came to Texas looking for a fresh start. I found more than I expected." The ambiguity of the statement was intentional, and Clara saw recognition flicker in Mrs. Morrison's eyes. This woman had heard about Friday's auction, no question. Everyone in town had heard by now. But Clara's tone and posture dared her to mention it, to make explicit what everyone was thinking but no one wanted to say aloud. Mrs. Morrison made her choice. "Well, welcome to Bitter Creek, Mrs. Granger. I hope you'll be very happy here." The words were proper but cool, reserving judgment. They made their purchases, flour, sugar, coffee, and various sundries, while navigating the careful curiosity of other customers who found reasons to linger in the store. Silas handled it with admirable patience, introducing Clara to each person who approached, repeating the same simple story. They'd met, married quickly, were making a life together at the Bridger Ranch. They were loading their purchases into Chester's saddlebags when Clara heard a voice that made her blood run cold. "Well, well, if it ain't the loving couple." Vernon Whitmore stood on the sidewalk about 10 feet away, swaying slightly with the telltale looseness of a man who'd been drinking since morning. His clothes were the same ones he'd worn Friday, now even more stained and rumpled. His eyes were bloodshot and mean. Silas's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, but Clara touched his arm, stopping him. "Don't," she said quietly. "He's not worth it." "Listen to your wife, Granger," Vernon sneered. "She knows her place, unlike some uppity girls who forget that their guardians have rights." "You gave up your rights when you tried to sell her," Silas said, his voice dangerously soft. "You got no claim on her anymore, Vernon. Best you remember that." "That's so?" Vernon took a stumbling step forward. "Because I've been talking to some folks, and they tell me a marriage can be annulled if it was done under false pretenses. If, say, a man married a woman just to steal her away from her rightful guardian." "I'm not anyone's property," Clara said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "And you stopped being my guardian the moment you put me on that auction block. You have no legal standing, no moral standing, and no right to speak to me at all." Vernon's face darkened with rage. "You ungrateful little... I took you in when your father died, fed you, clothed you, gave you a roof over your head. You starved me, stole from me, and sold me for $3 and a bottle of whiskey," Clara countered, her fear transforming into anger. "Don't pretend you were doing me any favors, Vernon. We both know the truth." Several townspeople had stopped to watch the confrontation, forming a loose circle around them. Clara was aware of their attention, aware that how she handled this moment would define how people saw her, as Vernon's victim or as her own person. Vernon lunged forward, his hand reaching for Clara's arm, but Silas was faster. He stepped between them, his hand now openly on his gun. "Touch her, and it's the last thing you do," he said flatly. "I mean that, Vernon. I will put you in the ground before I let you lay a hand on her." "You threatening me, Granger?" Vernon's voice rose, attracting even more attention. "Everyone hear that? He's threatening me!" "I'm making a promise," Silas corrected. "There's a difference. Clara's my wife now, under my protection. Anyone who tries to hurt her answers to me. That clear enough for you?" Vernon's eyes darted around, looking for support, for someone who would take his side. But the gathered townspeople remained silent, their faces showing various degrees of discomfort and disapproval, though whether that disapproval was directed at Vernon or at the scene in general was hard to say. Sheriff Daniels emerged from the crowd, a tired-looking man in his 50s with a badge pinned to his vest and resignation written across his features. "That's enough," he said wearily. "Vernon, go sleep it off. Granger, take your wife home. Everyone else, show's over." "He threatened me, Sheriff," Vernon protested. "You heard him." "I heard a man defending his wife from a drunk who tried to grab her," Sheriff Daniels said. "Now move along, Vernon, before I arrest you for public intoxication and disturbing the peace." Vernon opened his mouth to argue further, but something in the sheriff's expression stopped him. He stumbled backward, pointing a shaking finger at Clara. "This ain't over," he spat. "You ain't seen the last of me, girl." "Yes, she has," Silas said quietly, "because if I see you near her again, Vernon, if I even hear that you've been asking about her, or talking about her, or thinking about her too hard, You and I are going to have a conversation you won't walk away from. Understand? Vernon's face twisted with impotent rage, but he turned and staggered away, disappearing into the nearest saloon. The crowd began to disperse, conversations starting up again in low, urgent tones. Clara knew they'd be the talk of the town by nightfall, the hasty marriage, the confrontation with Vernon, Silas's barely veiled threat. Sheriff Daniels approached them, his expression unreadable. That was quite a show, Granger. Not sure it helped your situation any. Wasn't trying to help my situation, Silas replied. Just protecting my wife. The sheriff's gaze moved to Clara, assessing. You all right, ma'am? He hurt you? I'm fine, Clara said. Thank you for intervening. Just doing my job. Sheriff Daniels looked back at Silas. Though for the record, making threats in front of witnesses ain't the smartest move. Vernon's a drunk and a scoundrel, but he's got rights. You actually hurt him. I'd have to arrest you. Only if you could prove it was me, Silas said mildly. The sheriff sighed. Don't make this complicated, Granger. You got yourself a wife, you got a good life at Bridger's Ranch. Don't throw it away because Vernon Whitmore's a piece of trash. He'll drink himself to death soon enough without your help. They finished loading their supplies and mounted Chester, Clara settling behind Silas once again. As they rode out of town, she could feel eyes following them, could imagine the conversations already starting in parlors and shops and saloons. The auction bride and her mysterious savior, the hasty marriage, the confrontation with the drunken guardian. Bitter Creek would feast on this story for weeks. I'm sorry, Clara said once they were clear of town. I didn't mean to cause a scene. You didn't cause anything, Silas replied. Vernon did. And anyway, it was going to happen sooner or later. Better to face it head on than spend weeks worrying about when he'd show up. Do you really think he'll try something? Come after me? Silas was quiet for a moment, his body tense beneath her hands. Honestly, I don't know. Vernon's a coward, which makes him unpredictable. He might give up and move on to easier prey, or he might get drunk enough to convince himself he can still win. Either way, we'll be ready. When they arrived back at the ranch, Tom was waiting on the porch, his posture suggesting he'd been watching for their return. Heard you had some excitement in town, he said as they dismounted. News travels fast out here. Miguel ran into one of the Morrison ranch hands at the creek. Silas quickly recounted the confrontation while Clara helped unload the supplies. Tom listened with his usual calm attention, his expression giving nothing away until the story was finished. Vernon's a problem that's going to need solving, Tom finally said. But threatening him publicly wasn't the way to do it, Silas. You know that. What was I supposed to do? Let him grab her? Of course not, but there's a difference between stopping him and threatening to kill him in front of half the town. Tom rubbed his weathered face tiredly. Now, if anything happens to Vernon, if he gets drunk and falls off his horse, if he picks a fight with the wrong person, folks are going to look at you first. I don't care what folks think, Silas said stubbornly. Maybe you should, Tom replied. Because what folks think affects Clara, too. She's got to live in this community, shop in that town, build a life here. Every action you take reflects on her now. The truth of Tom's words settled over them like a heavy blanket. Clara understood what he meant. Her reputation, her ability to integrate into this community, depended not just on her own actions, but on Silas's as well. They were bound together now, for better or worse, and his choices affected her future. Tom's right, Clara said quietly. I appreciate you defending me, Silas. More than I can say. But we need to be smart about this. Vernon's looking for any excuse to challenge our marriage, to cause trouble. We can't give him ammunition. Silas looked at her, his dark eyes troubled. So what do we do? Just let him harass you whenever he feels like it? No, Clara said. We document everything. If he approaches me, we make sure there are witnesses. If he threatens me, we report it to the sheriff. We build a case that Vernon is dangerous, unstable, unfit to have ever been anyone's guardian. And if the law can't protect me... She paused, meeting his gaze directly. Then and only then do we consider other options. Tom nodded approvingly. Smart thinking, Mrs. Granger. Use the law when you can. Only go outside it when you have no other choice. That evening, Clara sat at the kitchen table with Tom's ranch ledgers spread before her, beginning the work he'd asked her to do. The numbers told stories, feed costs rising, beef prices fluctuating, wages paid consistently every month regardless of profit margins. She could see where Tom had made good decisions and where he'd been too generous, where expenses could be trimmed without sacrificing quality. She was so absorbed in the work that she didn't notice Silas enter until he spoke. "You're good at that. The numbers, I mean." Clara looked up, blinking to refocus her eyes. "My father taught me. He said numbers don't lie, which makes them more reliable than most people." Silas sat across from her, a cup of coffee in his hands. "I've been thinking about what happened in town. What Tom said. He's right that I let my temper get ahead of my sense. I'm sorry if I made things harder for you." "You were trying to protect me," Clara said. "I can't fault you for that. Still, I promised you protection without complications, but now I've probably complicated things plenty." He stared into his coffee. "The truth is, when I saw Vernon reaching for you, something in me just snapped. All I could think about was that kid I killed, how I didn't protect him from his own stupidity, didn't walk away when I should have. And I swore I'd never let someone get hurt on my watch again if I could prevent it." Clara set down her pencil and looked at him, really looked at him. This complicated man who carried so much guilt and tried so hard to be better than his past. "You can't save everyone, Silas. That kid in Abilene made his own choices, just like Vernon makes his. You're not responsible for other people's mistakes." "Maybe not," Silas said, "but I'm responsible for my own. And my mistake today was letting anger make my decisions instead of wisdom." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Clara returning to her ledgers while Silas nursed his coffee. Outside, the sun was setting in spectacular fashion, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Charlie's voice drifted in from somewhere near the barn, singing an old trail song in his gravelly voice. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said suddenly. "Sure." "Why did you really help me? I know you've explained it, being decent, second chances, all of that. But there must be more to it. You risked your safety, your reputation, your peace of mind. People don't usually do that for strangers without a deeper reason." Silas was quiet for so long that Clara thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with old pain. "I had a sister once, Emma. She was younger than me by 3 years, prettiest girl in our county. Smart too, wanted to be a teacher." He paused, his hands tightening around his cup. "When I left for the war, I promised her I'd come back and help her get to teacher's college. But when I did come back, I was too broken, too angry, too drunk to keep that promise. Emma waited for me for a while, but eventually she stopped waiting." "What happened to her?" Clara asked gently. "She married a man who seemed respectable, owned a dry goods store, went to church every Sunday, said all the right things. 6 months after the wedding, he beat her so badly she lost sight in one eye. When she tried to leave him, he dragged her back, said she was his property, his wife, and the law backed him up." Silas's voice had gone flat, emotionless, the way people sound when they're recounting trauma too painful to feel. "She hung herself in their barn. I was in jail in Kansas when it happened, arrested for fighting. Didn't even get to her funeral." Clara felt tears stinging her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Silas. When I saw you on that auction block," Silas continued, "I saw Emma. I saw every woman who's ever been treated like property, who's ever been trapped by law and custom and men's cruelty. And I thought, not this time. This time I can do something. This time I can be the man I should have been for my sister." He finally looked up, and Clara saw the sheen of tears in his dark eyes. "So that's why, really. I was trying to save Emma through you, trying to make up for a failure I can never actually fix." Clara reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "You did save me, Silas. Whatever your reasons, whatever ghosts you were trying to quiet, you saved my life. Emma would be proud of you." "Maybe," Silas said doubtfully, "or maybe she'd say I should have been there for her when it mattered." "You can't change the past," Clara said softly. "But you can honor her memory by being better now, by helping people who need it, by being the man she believed you could be." They talked late into the night, sharing stories about their families, their pasts, their hopes and fears. Clara told him about her mother's death from yellow fever, about learning to run her father's store while barely a teenager, about the loneliness of being the only woman in many business meetings. Silas told her about growing up poor in Tennessee, about the war that had broken him, about the long road back to something resembling wholeness. By the time they finally said goodnight and retreated to their separate rooms, Clara felt like she understood her unexpected husband better. He wasn't perfect. He carried darkness and damage and more regrets than any one person should bear. But he was trying every day to be better than he'd been. And that, Clara thought as she drifted off to sleep, was all anyone could really ask of another person. Not perfection, but effort. Not sinlessness, but the genuine attempt to do right even when doing right was hard. The stars outside her window blazed brilliant and cold, and somewhere in the night a horse whinnied softly to its companions. Life on the ranch continued its ancient rhythms, indifferent to human drama, but somehow comforting in its constancy. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that Clara found both comforting and strange. She woke each morning to the sounds of the ranch coming alive, dressed in Mary's old clothes that she'd carefully altered to fit better, and descended to a kitchen where Tom usually had coffee already brewing. Her days filled with work, tending the vegetable garden that had been neglected since Mary's death, helping with meal preparation, and spending hours over the ranch ledgers, finding ways to stretch dollars and maximize profits without sacrificing the quality Tom insisted upon. Miguel made good on his promise to teach her to ride again. Luna, recovered from her foaling and devoted to her growing colt, proved too protective for a novice, so Miguel instead introduced Clara to a gentle bay mare named Mariposa. Butterfly in Spanish, he explained, because of the way she'd been skittish and flighty when young, but had grown into steady reliability. Like people, Miguel said as he helped Clara into the saddle that first morning, we are not born who we will become. We grow into ourselves. The riding came back faster than Clara expected, muscle memory resurfacing from childhood lessons. Within a week, she could handle Mariposa at a walk and trot. Within 2, she was cantering across the open prairie with Miguel riding beside her, the wind in her hair and a sense of freedom in her chest that she'd never experienced before. On horseback, she could go anywhere, be anyone, escape anything. The knowledge of that possibility was almost as intoxicating as the actual movement. Silas watched her progress with quiet approval, occasionally offering tips about posture or rein handling, but mostly letting Miguel do the teaching. He kept his distance in other ways too, respecting the boundaries they'd established, never entering her room without knocking, never presuming intimacy just because they shared a last name. They took meals together, worked side by side sometimes, and talked in the evenings when their paths crossed, but they remained fundamentally separate. 2 people sharing a legal bond but maintaining careful emotional distance, except the distance was getting harder to maintain. Clara found herself noticing things about Silas she shouldn't care about. The way he pushed his hair back when he was frustrated, the rare smile that transformed his serious face, the gentleness in his hands when he worked with animals or mended something broken. She noticed how the other men deferred to his judgment, how Tom trusted him with the ranch's most important tasks, how even Charlie, who'd been ranching since before Silas was born, asked his opinion on difficult matters. And sometimes she'd catch Silas watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between wonder and concern, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real or worried she might disappear if he looked away too long. 3 weeks after their confrontation with Vernon, Clara was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard the sound of an approaching horse. She straightened, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, and felt her stomach drop when she recognized the rider. Sheriff Daniels rode into the yard at an easy pace, his face giving nothing away, but his presence alone was enough to set Clara's nerves jangling. Tom emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, and Silas appeared from the direction of the corral. They converged on the sheriff together, presenting a united front. "Sheriff," Tom said evenly, "what brings you out this way?" Daniels dismounted slowly, his movement suggesting this wasn't a social call. "Got some news I thought you folks should hear directly, rather than through the gossip mill. It's about Vernon Whitmore." Clara's hands tightened on the weeds she was still holding. "What about him?" "He's dead." The sheriff said it bluntly, without preamble or softening. "Found him this morning in the alley behind Murphy's saloon. Looks like he'd been there since sometime last night." The weeds dropped from Clara's nerveless fingers. Dead. Vernon was dead. The man who'd sold her, who'd haunted her nightmares, who'd represented everything dark and cruel about her recent past. Gone. She waited for relief to flood through her, but instead she felt only a strange numbness. "How'd he die?" Silas asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Drunk," Sheriff Daniels said. "Drunk and stupid. Looks like he picked a fight with the wrong people, couple of drifters passing through town. They beat him pretty bad and left him in the alley. By the time anyone found him this morning, he'd bled out from a head wound." The sheriff's gaze moved between Silas and Clara. "I'm here because I need to know where you two were last night." "Here," Silas said immediately. "All of us were here. We had supper together at 6, then sat on the porch for a few hours talking. Charlie, Miguel, Danny, they'll all confirm it." "That's right," Tom said. "I can personally vouch that Silas and Clara never left the ranch yesterday or last night." Sheriff Daniels nodded slowly, his expression suggesting he'd expected this answer. "I figured as much, but I had to ask. Given the bad blood between Vernon and Silas and the fact that Silas threatened him publicly 3 weeks ago, I needed to eliminate you as a suspect." "Are we eliminated?" Clara asked, finding her voice. "Far as I'm concerned, yes. You got solid alibis, and honestly, this doesn't look like Silas's work anyway. Whoever beat Vernon did it in a rage, messy, and personal. If Silas had wanted him dead, it would have been cleaner. A bullet? Probably, not a beating." The sheriff mounted his horse again. "Anyway, I thought you should know. Vernon's got no family besides you, Mrs. Granger, so if you want to claim the body for burial, you got that right. If not, the town will bury him in Potter's Field." Clara thought about Vernon lying in an unmarked grave, unmourned and unremembered. She thought about the man he might have been before gambling and whiskey destroyed him, the brother her father had tried to help before giving up. She thought about how easy it would be to let him disappear into the earth without ceremony or acknowledgement. "I'll pay for a proper burial," she said quietly, "and a marker with his name. He was family once, even if he forgot what that meant. He deserves that much." Sheriff Daniels looked at her with something like respect. "That's generous of you, Mrs. Granger, more generous than most would be. I'll make the arrangements and send you the bill." He tipped his hat. "Good day, folks. Sorry to bring such news." After the sheriff left, Clara remained standing in the garden, staring at her dirt-stained hands without really seeing them. She heard Silas approach but didn't turn around. "You all right?" he asked softly. "I don't know," Clara admitted. "I thought I'd be relieved. He can't hurt me anymore, can't challenge our marriage, can't sell me again. I should be celebrating, but instead I just feel empty." Silas stood beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his presence like a warm shadow. "It's okay to feel complicated things about complicated people. Vernon was terrible to you, but he was also human. You can be glad he can't hurt you anymore while still feeling sad that he died the way he did." "Is that how you felt when that kid in Abilene died?" "Yeah," Silas said after a moment. "Relief that the fight was over, guilt that it had happened at all, sadness for the waste of a young life. All of it at once, so mixed up I couldn't tell one feeling from another." He finally looked at her. "You're a better person than Vernon deserved, Clara. Paying for his burial when you don't have to, when he tried to destroy you. That says more about your character than anything else could." That evening, they gathered in the main room after supper, the day's work finished and the night settling in around them. Danny tried to lighten the mood with another of his rambling stories, this one about a horse that had supposedly outsmarted him 3 days running, but even his natural enthusiasm couldn't quite dispel the strange atmosphere Vernon's death had created. "It's weird," Danny finally said, his boyish face troubled. "I mean, I never met the man except that one time in town, but knowing he's dead feels significant somehow, like a door closing or a chapter ending." "That's exactly what it is," Tom said. "Vernon Whitmore was a loose thread, an unresolved problem. Now he's resolved, and life can move forward." He looked at Clara with his usual steady directness. "How you feeling about it, Mrs. Granger?" Clara considered the question carefully. "Like I'm free," she said slowly. "Really free, for the first time since my father died. Vernon was the last tie to that horrible period of my life. With him gone, I can truly start over. Nothing from before can touch me now." "Except the memories," Miguel said quietly. "Those do not die when the people die. Those we carry always." "True," Clara agreed, "but memories I can live with. It was the ongoing threat I couldn't bear. Charlie raised his coffee cup in a toast. To freedom, then, and to Clara, who's handled more in a month than most people face in a lifetime. They all raised their cups, coffee for most, water for Danny, who claimed coffee made him jittery, and drank to Clara's freedom. As she sipped, Clara felt something shift inside her, some tightness she hadn't even known she'd been holding finally releasing. Vernon was gone. The auction was behind her. She was Clara Granger now, a ranch wife with work to do and a place in the world. The summer deepened into August heat that shimmered off the prairie like water. Clara's skin bronzed from hours outdoors, her hands calloused from work, her body growing stronger from riding and lifting and the constant physical demands of ranch life. She learned to rope, badly at first, with the lasso tangling around her own feet more often than catching anything useful, but gradually improving under Charlie's patient instruction. She learned to recognize different cattle by their markings, to spot signs of illness or injury, to understand the subtle communications between horses. She also grew closer to the men she lived among. Tom's gruff exterior hid a deeply thoughtful nature and a dry wit that caught her off guard. Charlie told stories of the old days, when Texas was still wild and dangerous, that made her laugh and gasp in equal measure. Miguel taught her Spanish words and phrases, patient with her terrible accent. And Danny, sweet, awkward Danny, treated her like the older sister he'd never had, coming to her with his problems and dreams and endless questions about everything. But it was with Silas that the relationship was changing most profoundly. They'd started as strangers bound by legal convenience, but something else was growing between them, a friendship first, built on shared meals and easy conversation and mutual respect. Then something deeper, unnamed and maybe unacknowledged, but real nonetheless. Clara noticed it in small moments, the way Silas's eyes sought her out across the yard during the day, checking that she was safe, that she was happy. The way he remembered details she mentioned in passing, that she loved blackberries, that she missed reading books, that she'd always wanted to learn to shoot a gun, and acted on them. The basket of blackberries that appeared on her windowsill one morning, gathered from wild bushes along the creek. The 3 books Tom mysteriously acquired on his next trip to town, left casually on the kitchen table where she'd find them. The afternoon Silas spent teaching her to handle his rifle, standing behind her to correct her stance, his hands gentle on her shoulders, his breath warm against her ear. She noticed it in the way he spoke to her, too. The formal Mrs. Granger had given way to Clara within the first week, but now there was a warmth in the way he said her name that hadn't been there before, a tenderness that made her pulse quicken and her cheeks flush. And she noticed it most of all late at night, when the house was quiet and she lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the man sleeping just down the hall. The man who'd saved her life, who'd married her to protect her, who'd asked for nothing in return. The man who was becoming, against all reason and expectation, someone she couldn't imagine living without. It terrified her. One evening in late August, Clara was in the kitchen preparing vegetables for the next day's stew when Silas entered through the back door, his shirt dusty and his hair damp with sweat. He'd been working on the fence line all day in the brutal heat, and exhaustion showed in every line of his body. "You look like you could use some water," Clara said, gesturing to the pitcher she'd filled from the pump. "I could use about 100 gallons of water," Silas replied, but he smiled as he said it. He poured himself a glass and drank it down in long gulps, then poured another. "Lord, but it's hot out there. Heat like this makes everything harder." "Come sit for a minute," Clara said, pulling out a chair. "You'll make yourself sick if you don't rest." Silas sat with a grateful sigh, stretching his long legs out in front of him. They were alone in the kitchen, the other men scattered across the ranch at various tasks, Tom napping in his room, as he often did in the late afternoon. The moment felt intimate in a way their interactions usually didn't, wrapped in the golden light of evening and the quiet of the empty house. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said, not looking up from the carrot she was peeling. "Sure. Are you happy?" The question came out more vulnerable than she'd intended. "I mean, with this arrangement, with me being here. I know it's changed your life in ways you probably didn't anticipate, and I want to make sure this is still what you want." Silas was quiet for a long moment. When Clara finally looked up, she found him watching her with an expression so intense It made her breath catch. Happy's a complicated word, he said slowly. But yeah, I guess I am. Happier than I've been in a long time anyway. Having you here, it's made me remember what it's like to think about someone besides myself. To have someone to come home to, even if we're just friends. Even if it's not a real marriage. But what if it could be? The words escaped before Clara could stop them, and she immediately felt her face flame with embarrassment. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have... Don't apologize, Silas interrupted, leaning forward. You asking what I think you're asking? Clara set down the carrot and the peeling knife, her hands trembling slightly. I don't know what I'm asking. I just know that somewhere along the way, this stopped being just a convenient arrangement for me. You stopped being just the man who saved me. You became... She struggled for words. You became someone I look for in the morning. Someone whose opinion matters. Someone I trust completely. Someone I... She trailed off, unable to finish the thought, terrified of his reaction. Silas stood and crossed to her, kneeling beside her chair so they were eye level. Someone you what? He asked gently. Someone I'm falling in love with, Clara whispered. And I know that wasn't part of the deal. I know you married me to protect me, not because you wanted a real wife. But I can't help how I feel, and I thought maybe you should know. So you can tell me if I need to leave, if this is too complicated, if... Silas silenced her with a kiss. It was gentle and tentative, asking permission even as it granted it, and Clara felt the world tilt beneath her. She'd been kissed before, chased pecks from the boy in Missouri who'd courted her, but nothing like this. Nothing that felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. When they broke apart, Silas rested his forehead against hers, his hands cupping her face with infinite tenderness. You're not leaving, he said hoarsely. And this isn't too complicated. Or maybe it is, but I don't care. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being the woman I saved and became the woman I can't imagine living without. You mean that? Clara's voice was barely audible. I mean it, Silas said. I love you, Clara Granger. Somewhere between the auction block and now, between protection and partnership, I fell completely in love with you. And I've been terrified to tell you because I didn't want to ruin what we had, didn't want to pressure you, didn't want... This time Clara silenced him with a kiss, deeper and more confident than his had been, pouring months of suppressed feeling into it. When they finally pulled apart again, both were breathless and smiling. So what happens now? Clara asked. We're already married, but we've been living like strangers. How do we change that? Slowly, Silas said. We take our time, figure this out together. No rushing, no pressure. We court each other properly, even though we're already married, and when we're both ready, really ready, we can make this a real marriage in every sense. Clara nodded, relief and joy flooding through her in equal measure. I'd like that. They stood together, and Silas pulled her into an embrace, solid and warm and safe. Clara pressed her face against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart, thinking about how far she'd come. From an auction block to this, love freely given and freely received, chosen rather than forced, built on respect and trust rather than ownership and obligation. The vegetables for tomorrow's stew remained unpeeled on the counter, and neither of them cared. The fall brought its own challenges and its own joys. Clara and Silas navigated their evolving relationship with care, stealing moments of privacy when they could. Walks along the creek at sunset, quiet conversations on the porch after everyone else had gone to bed, kisses in the barn when no one was watching. They were courting, as Silas had suggested, learning each other not as married strangers, but as two people choosing to build something real together. The ranch hands noticed the change, of course. It was impossible to hide the way Silas's eyes followed Clara now, or the way she blushed when he entered a room, or the casual touches that had begun to appear. His hand on her back as they walked, her fingers brushing his as she passed him coffee. About damn time, Charlie muttered one evening, watching them sit close together on the porch. Painful watching two people in love pretend they weren't. Tom just smiled his knowing smile and said nothing, but Clara caught him watching them sometimes with an expression of satisfaction, as if he'd known all along how this would end. In October, on a crisp evening with the first hint of winter in the air, Silas knocked on Clara's door after everyone else had gone to bed. She opened it to find him standing in the hallway, nervous in a way she'd never seen him. "Can I come in?" he asked. I want to talk to you about something. Clara stepped aside and he entered her room. Truly entered it for the first time since she'd moved in 5 months ago. He looked around, taking in the small changes she'd made. The wildflowers in a jar on the windowsill, the books stacked on the desk, the photograph of her parents she'd rescued from Vernon's effects after his burial. I've been thinking, Silas began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. About us. About this marriage. About what we want it to be. Clara waited, her heart pounding. I know we said we'd take things slow, he continued, and I meant that. But Clara, it's been 5 months. And every day I fall more in love with you. Every day I wake up wanting to really be your husband. Not just in name, but in truth. And He took a deep breath. I want to ask your permission. To make this a real marriage. To stop sleeping in separate rooms and start building the kind of life married people usually build. Clara crossed to him and took his hands in hers. Yes, she said simply. Yes to all of it. I've been waiting for you to ask. Hoping you would, because I want the same things. You're sure? Silas asked, searching her face. This isn't gratitude or obligation? This is really what you want? I'm sure, Clara said. I love you, Silas Granger. Not because you saved me, not because you gave me a home, but because of who you are. Because you're kind and strong and honest. Because you're patient with Danny and respectful with Miguel and loyal to Tom. Because you're trying every day to be better than you were. Because when I imagine my future, you're in every part of it. Silas pulled her into his arms, and they stood there for a long moment, holding each other in the lamplight. Then he kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Move into my room? He asked when they finally pulled apart. Or I'll move into yours. I don't care which. I just don't want to spend another night down the hall from you, pretending I don't wish you were beside me. Your room's bigger, Claire said practically, then laughed at the absurdity of making practical decisions in such a moment. And yes, tomorrow. We'll tell everyone tomorrow that things are changing. But they didn't have to tell anyone. When Clara descended for breakfast the next morning, having spent the night in Silas's arms for the first time, Tom took one look at them and grinned. Well, well, he said mildly. I guess congratulations are in order. Again. Charlie chuckled into his coffee. Young love. Beautiful thing. Miguel just smiled and said, Bueno. It was meant to be. And Danny, bless him, looked confused for a moment before understanding dawned. Oh, you mean they're really married now? Like, actually married? When everyone laughed, he blushed. What? I thought they already were. We were, Silas said, his arm around Clara's waist. But now we are, if that makes sense. It makes perfect sense, Tom said, and I, for one, am glad to see it. Mary would have been happy for you both. The winter passed in a blur of happiness that Clara had never expected to find. She and Silas settled into married life with surprising ease, learning each other's rhythms and habits, navigating the small conflicts that arose with humor and grace. They worked together during the day and retired together at night, and slowly the boundaries between them dissolved until Clara couldn't remember what it had felt like to be alone. In March, she discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. Joy at the life growing inside her, terror at all the things that could go wrong, all the ways she might fail. But Silas was there, steady and sure, promising her they'd face whatever came together. We're going to be parents, he said wonderingly, his hand on her still flat belly. A family. A real family. Tom threw a celebration dinner that night, and the whole ranch gathered to toast the coming baby. Charlie offered unsolicited advice about child-rearing that made everyone laugh. Miguel carved a small wooden horse for the baby, even though it wouldn't arrive for months. And Danny proclaimed himself the baby's future favorite uncle, to which Charlie responded that the baby hadn't met him yet, so probably shouldn't make that commitment. The baby, a girl they named Emma after Silas's sister, was born in November during a cold snap that had everyone huddled near fires. The birth was hard, longer, and more painful than Clara had prepared for. But when it was over and they placed the squalling infant in her arms, Clara understood for the first time what unconditional love truly meant. Silas cried when he held his daughter for the first time, tears streaming down his weathered face as he stared at the tiny life they'd created. Emma, he whispered, your aunt would have loved you. And I promise, I'll be the father I should have been a brother. I'll protect you and love you and never let anyone hurt you. Clara watched her husband make promises to their daughter and felt her heart swell with so much love she thought it might burst. This man, who'd been broken by war and guilt and loss, who'd found redemption through hard work and second chances, who'd saved her life without even knowing he'd needed saving too. This man was the father of her child, the love of her life, her partner in every sense of the word. Time flowed onward. Emma grew from infant to toddler, a whirlwind of energy and curiosity who had the entire ranch wrapped around her tiny finger. Charlie taught her about horses before she could walk. Miguel sang to her in Spanish. Danny let her help with his chores, which usually meant making things take twice as long. And Tom, stern Tom who claimed he was too old for nonsense, could be found most afternoons with Emma on his knee, telling her stories about her grandmother Mary. Vernon Whitmore became a distant memory, a name on a grave marker that Clara visited once a year out of duty rather than love. She'd forgiven him, eventually, not because he deserved it, but because holding on to anger only poisoned the holder. He'd been a broken man who'd made terrible choices, and while those choices had nearly destroyed her, they'd also led her to this life, this family, this unexpected joy. On a warm spring evening 2 years after Emma's birth, Clara sat on the porch with Silas, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Emma slept inside, worn out from a day of helping with the ranch work. The air smelled of mesquite and new grass, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed contentedly. You ever think about that day in Bitter Creek? Silas asked suddenly. The auction. Sometimes, Clara admitted, usually in dreams. But even then it doesn't have the same power it used to. It's like something that happened to someone else, in another lifetime. I think about it too, Silas said. Think about how close we came to never finding each other. If I'd been a few minutes later getting to town, if I'd decided not to investigate the commotion, if I'd walked away instead of stepping in. He shook his head. Scares me, thinking how easily we could have missed each other. Clara took his hand, lacing their fingers together. But we didn't miss each other. You were there exactly when you needed to be, and so was I. Maybe that's fate, maybe it's luck, maybe it's just the universe aligning properly for once. Does it matter? No, Silas said softly. I guess it doesn't. What matters is we're here now, together, building something good. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, those same brilliant Texas stars that had witnessed Clara's lowest moment and now bore witness to her greatest happiness. Inside the house, Emma stirred and called for her mama, and Clara rose to tend to her daughter, this miracle born from hardship and hope. As she passed Silas, he caught her hand and pulled her down for a kiss. I love you, Clara Granger, he said against her lips. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for choosing this life with me. Thank you for asking, Clara replied. Thank you for seeing me on that auction block and deciding I was worth saving. You were always worth saving, Silas said. I just got lucky enough to be the one who did it. But Clara knew the truth was more complicated than that. Yes, Silas had saved her that day in Bitter Creek, had stepped between her and violence, had offered protection when no one else would, but she'd saved him too, in her own way. She'd given him purpose, given him a reason to be the man he'd always wanted to be, given him a family to love and protect and build a life around. They'd saved each other, really. Two broken people finding wholeness in unexpected places, building something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. Years later, when Emma was old enough to ask about how her parents met, they would tell her a simplified version of the story. They'd say they met in town, that Papa had helped Mama when she was in trouble, that they'd fallen in love and gotten married and lived happily ever after. The darker details, the auction, the desperation, the marriage of convenience that became something real, those would wait until Emma was older, until she could understand the full complexity of their beginning. But the ending? The ending was simple. It was this. Two people who'd been lost finding each other, two damaged souls learning to be whole together, two lives intertwining until they became one story, one family, one love. On that porch in the fading light, with their daughter calling from inside and the ranch settling into evening rhythms around them, Clara and Silas stood together, not as savior and saved, not as convenience and obligation, but as husband and wife in the truest, deepest sense. And when Clara went inside to comfort Emma, Silas followed, because that's what you did when you had a family. You showed up, you stayed, you loved through the hard moments and celebrated the joyful ones, and built a life one day at a time. The Texas sky deepened to indigo, stars blazing like promises overhead. Somewhere out on the prairie, coyotes sang their ancient songs. In the barn, horses shifted and settled into sleep. And in the ranch house, the Granger family, born from chaos, forged in compassion, bound by love, continued writing their story. "Not while I still breathe," Silas had said that day in the square. A promise, a vow, a declaration that some things were worth fighting for even when fighting was hard. He'd kept that promise. They both had. And in keeping it, they'd discovered something neither had expected to find. Not just safety or survival or convenience, but joy. Real, lasting, hard-won joy. And really, what more could anyone ask for than that?